You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for another edition of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly disunited surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Alrighty. Good morning, folks. Hope everybody's having a good one. Let's get into the headlines. It is September 29th, just past 7 a.m. Eastern, and we've got COVID stats for you. Yesterday in the United States, there were 104,000, almost call it 105,000 new COVID cases reported. Also, 2,178 new deaths here in the U.S. from COVID. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 115,000 cases per day. That's a decrease of 26% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 56% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. That's up from 55% yesterday. And 64% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 43,205,000 people across the United States. It has killed 692,737 people here in the U.S. total. In national news, during testimony yesterday from top generals speaking before the Senate Armed Services Committee, military officials contradicted claims by Biden that it had not been recommended to him to keep troops on the ground in Afghanistan. I just want to do a quick heads up. Do we have this clip ready yet? We have that? Andre, I want to play this first clip. For everybody listening, this is Senator Tom Cotton speaking with the three generals attending. Lloyd Austin, Mark Milley, and a bunch of stuff going on this morning. And a third one, too. You're gonna hear these rounds of questioning. And, of course, the thing to pay attention to here, you'll hear it, is what did Biden say, which is nobody'd recommended to pull out, to keep troops on the ground, versus what are they saying? And they're kind of, talking their way around it, but you'll hear it for yourself. Andre, let's play this clip.
General Milley, it's your testimony that you recommended 2,500 troops approximately stay in Afghanistan?
As I've said many times before this committee and other committees, I don't share my personal recommendations to the president, but I can tell you my personal opinion and my assessment if that's what you want.
Yes, please.
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution.
Did you ever present that assessment personally to President Biden?
I don't discuss exactly what my conversations are with the sitting president in the Oval Office, but I can tell you what my personal opinion was, and I'm always candid.
General McKenzie, do you share that assessment?
Senator, I do share that assessment.
Did you ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
Again, I'm not going to be able to comment on those executive discussions.
Did General Miller ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
I think it would be best to ask him. I believe that his opinion was well heard.
Secretary Austin, President Biden last month in an interview with George Stephanopoulos said that no military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence in Afghanistan. Is that true?
Senator Cotton, I believe that, well, first of all, I know the president to be an honest and forthright man. And secondly,
it's a simple question, Secretary Austin. He said no senior military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence behind. Is that true or not? Did these officer and General Miller's recommendations get to the president personally?
Their input was received by the president and considered by the president, for sure. In terms of what they specifically recommended, Senator, as they just said, they're not going to provide what they recommended in confidence.
I mean, it sounds to me, it's shocking to me. It sounds to me like maybe their best military advice was never presented personally to the President of the United States about such a highly consequential matter.
And again, that was Senator Tom Cotton speaking with the three generals, and you can hear it yourself. We'll come back to this. We're going to be talking about this a bunch today, but we have other news too, of course. Going on with headlines here. Yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security denied landing rights for a charter plane carrying more than 100 Americans and U.S. green card holders evacuating from Afghanistan. The plane carried 28 Americans, 83 green card holders, and 6 people with U.S. special immigration visas. And the White House is touting success in their vaccination attempts. The publicized findings that show near identical vaccination rates across ethnic groups. The report by the Kaiser Family Foundation says 71% of white people, 70% of African-American people, and 73% of Latinos have gotten vaccinated. Chief Pandemic Response Coordinator Jeff Zients said, quote, "We know our work isn't done, but this is important progress," end quote. In international news, yesterday, YouTube blocked RT's German accounts over claims of coronavirus misinformation. Russia, in response, has threatened to block YouTube in the country if it didn't restore the banned channels. RT's editor-in-chief called the ban a, quote, "real media war declared by the state of Germany to the state of Russia," end quote. And North Korea has claimed that it successfully tested a new hypersonic missile called Hwasong-8. They claimed the missile was a strategic weapon, quote unquote, which usually means it has nuclear capabilities. It seems, I'll close it here. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Seems like the whole North Korean, South Korean, well, specifically on the North Korean side, but yeah, South Korea has been doing it too. It's accelerating a little bit, right? Am I wrong on that?
No, you're not wrong on that. It's a little weird. I mean, this is the second missile test. And at one point, there was both testing missiles basically around the same time, if I'm not mistaken, on the same day. Yep. Which is kind of bizarre, considering that both were talking about reunification. You know, during the Trump administration, this was one of the things that people applauded. Well, I applauded Trump on, and I know a lot of lefties applauded Trump on. But there was also this administration where there were just reports about both wanting to have some level of reunification talks.
Yep.
So I don't know if the brinksmanship is there in order to kind of spur on the talks. I'm not sure, but it does seem like there's a bit more saber rattling than there's been in a while.
It seems to be the case. I'm just, with more missile launches. Yeah. I don't know rhetorically. This also comes out as, I don't know. It seems like they're theoretically not that far from having some sort of long-lasting conversation. I don't know.
It doesn't. I mean, that's the weird part. I mean, both seem to want some level of reunification.
Especially after Trump's moves, which were a success. I don't know.
They were definitely open to the conversations on it. Yeah. And so I'm not quite sure. I mean, it's just very strange. It almost feels like if the United States wasn't in the middle of it, they could probably actually talk and get together. Because right now, I think we saw like 50,000 troops in that country on the military, demilitarized. Yeah. And so look, I get the feeling that if we weren't a part of that conversation, or if we were working to get them to let's say, have a conversation and get more engaged in the conversation, that they probably could do it. It doesn't seem like they're dramatically far apart where they can't necessarily bring down a hostility. But for whatever reason, the saber rattling seems to be getting that much more over the past 2 weeks.
Yes.
Which is aggravating, considering there seemed to be a light at the end of the tunnel during the Trump administration.
Yeah, over the last couple of weeks. And also, yes. Other news, and this is another big one. We're going to get a couple of big ones today. But yesterday's testimony, Senate Armed Services Committee, we just heard the clip. That's the big takeaway for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Cotton pushing them on it. And I know that.
Great question.
A great series of questions. And he is pushing them on it. And I'll just go to you. I don't want to lead the witness here. What's your take on that?
Oh, I thought it was a great question. I mean, Biden got caught in a lie. And let's be clear. The issue here is not, we have civilian control of the military. And personally, I think that's a good thing. And so the issue here is not that Joe Biden made a choice one way or the other to pull out or to ignore military advice. The issue is that he lied to the public about it. I mean, this wasn't the first lie. Oh, we're not going to have these Saigon moments. Well, we did have a Saigon moment.
Yeah.
Oh, there's no Americans that are going to be left. Oh, well, there are Americans left behind. And it seems like one issue after the next, he didn't quite seem to know what was taking place on the ground in a war zone. I mean, he didn't even realize that the thing was going to fall apart. And now they're basically saying, hey, should we have kept troops there? Or did you ever advise the president to keep troops there? Well, none of them wanted to put a knife in him. Oh, I think the president is an honest man. Well, yeah, I get that. But did you advise him on that? And it was like, yeah, we did advise him on that. So the president has the right to blow off the military leaders if he wants to, and that's not a bad thing. Lying to the public is. That's my take on it.
Well, I guess what's interesting here is that Mark Milley is, in another clip, is defending himself basically, I'm not going to resign. It's the bit about resigning. I wouldn't resign. I wouldn't, he segues from talking about that to, I wouldn't defy the orders of the president effectively. It's my job to take his orders. Of course, pair that with what he was doing under Trump, where literally what came out recently in the past couple of weeks too, was he was going behind Trump, speaking with his Chinese counterpart.
Explaining that, of going through, trying to make his point about why he did that and what was his reasoning and rationale and everything else.
We should pull that clip up.
Yeah. I don't know. They can. I mean, yeah, we have time for it. If you guys want to grab it for us, that's the secondary clip. That's not the Tom Cotton one. That's the one immediately after Tom Cotton. But yeah, he goes into the explanation of it, and this comes from Bob Woodward's book. That really got under Republican skin, where it was two levels for it. One was dealing with China, meaning he was seeing reports that China was overly concerned because of things that was taking place in the United States, and they thought the country was, I guess, coming apart at the seams, and they thought Trump was an unreliable leader on that. He was concerned. He contacts his corresponding person in the Chinese government in order to have a conversation to basically be like, look, I will give you a heads up if anything breaks off before it happens. Calm down. And on the second point, where him and the other Joint Chiefs of Staffs were having a conversation, basically saying the president is unhinged. If there's any missile launch or nuclear missile launch, all of us will have that conversation.
We have, exactly. Yeah. It's not up to him. It's up to us.
It's not. Well, yeah.
Effectively, it's up to all of us.
It's up to all of us, right? Yeah. It's not going to be. It came across as if he was undercutting the president's will in that sense.
That's what he's doing, practically.
Yeah, that's what.
And everybody debates whether it's justified.
I don't want to be too overly strong on it, but it does come across as if he's trying to undercut. Like, look, we're all in agreement, right? We're in agreement, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It was one of those moments. So, I mean, and keep in mind, man, this happened once before when they were trying to basically saying whether or not they should use, the 25th Amendment to take out Trump when he first got in office. I think it was Comey and some of the other people. But let's play this clip. This is Mark Milley trying to explain himself of the Bob Woodward reporting.
I attended a meeting with Acting Secretary Miller where I briefed him on the call. Later that same day, on 8 January, Speaker of the House Pelosi called me to inquire about the president's ability to launch nuclear weapons. I sought to assure her that nuclear launch is governed by a very specific and deliberate process. She was concerned and made various personal references characterizing the president. I explained to her that the president is the sole nuclear launch authority and he doesn't launch them alone, and that I am not qualified to determine the mental health of the President of the United States. There are processes, protocols, and procedures in place, and I repeatedly assured her that there is no chance of an illegal, unauthorized, or accidental launch. By presidential directive and Secretary of Defense directives, the chairman is part of the process to ensure the president is fully informed when determining the use of the world's deadliest weapons. By law, I am not in the chain of command, and I know that. However, by presidential directive and DOD instruction, I am in the chain of communication to fulfill my legal statutory role as the president's primary military advisor. After the Speaker Pelosi call, I convened a short meeting in my office with key members of my staff to refresh all of us on the procedures which we practice daily at the action officer level. Additionally, I immediately informed Acting Secretary of Defense Miller of Speaker Pelosi's phone call. At no time was I attempting to change or influence the process, usurp authority, or insert myself in the chain of command.
There you go. Defending himself pretty markedly, but I don't know, man. Doesn't that contradict what we've heard from this book?
Well, you know, what Scott said, don't necessarily take everything Woodward said as, a flat fact. He could be a little dicey. But to be honest, it does sound like what Woodward said anyway. I mean, this just sounds like you're cutting it in a particular way, like cutting the language in a way that makes it seem a little bit less than what it was. But basically, it is the reporting that Woodward did. Yeah, man, see, for me, I don't have an issue with him contacting his counterpart in China. For me, that's just kind of normal political back and forth between the military members. And I kind of want that because that keeps a certain level of confusion down. I think the larger concern is the nuclear weapons thing, or them talking to each other like, all right, the president might not be altogether there. We're in agreement. We're in agreement. That part gets a little dicey to me because it's like, is it just nuclear weapons? Does it go below that?
But here's the thing, man. Between this clip and the last clip, you can also see this is these people just trying to cover their butts.
On some level, yeah.
Right? And so it's both of them. And so the people who want to take Biden down and don't care so much about the generals, even though they're, culpable in their own way, I would argue. Specifically, I'll put it like this. Why didn't we hear more? We were hearing constant leaks during the Trump administration about this failure of Trump's and that failure of Trump's. If in the lead up to this planned withdrawal, there were major problems with the planning, where it was like people in charge were like, Biden's just going for it. It's not going to work. None of this is going to work.
Yeah.
Hundreds or thousands of Americans are going to be left on the ground.
Because, if this was Trump, there would have been leaks all the way through.
There would have been leaks all the way
through. People putting knives in them and everything else.
And I'm not even saying that's a good thing or a bad thing or anything. I'm saying
is.
it's just a thing. It's just is what it is, like you like to say. And therefore, what does this mean? It means they're covering their butts. It means whatever they said. And I totally believe that they told Biden, yeah, we should do that.
Yeah, they're military. And of course they said something like that.
And then he's thinking, but I don't want to stay. Americans want us to get out. They've wanted us to get out forever. These guys are just trying to keep me there. None of those moves, in my opinion, are the right move. The right move is somewhere in between, where Biden is forceful enough to be like, no, we're going to get out. Here's how we're going to get out, et cetera. But Biden is not that forceful.
And the important part in that conversation also is that he turns around and doesn't want to own up to it because he doesn't want to deal with the press saying, well, wait a minute, the military generals said they wanted to keep 2,500 there. Mr. President, are you sure that's a good idea? Especially in the way that he didn't want to deal with that. That's the entire point where he basically lied about it. And look, to their credit, or to a detriment, they did try to defend him. I mean, it was like, we can't go into those personal conversations with the president. The president, an honest man. It's like, yeah, but you're telling me he's an honest man as you tell me he lied to the public on this very specific issue. So, yeah, it's an interesting conversation to put it mildly. But, yeah, Biden lied.
Yep.
Biden got busted in that lie. And it wasn't just one of the generals saying it. It was all three basically saying it.
And that is the big takeaway from this.
Yes.
But I think it's worthwhile keeping it in mind also that the other takeaway should be these dudes are trying to cover their butts. They should have handled this more appropriately, too. What I heard is...
I guess the question is how, though? Like, at the point where Biden is like, we're leaving, how do the military generals in that situation, meaning, are you saying they should come up with a different plan of action?
If they're trying to make his will happen, which is get us out by September 11th, and they know that his way of doing it isn't going to work, then they should come up with alternate proposals before September 11th, that kind of thing. These are the stages we're going to, brainstorm a couple of options, workshop them, come up with a couple of options to present to him. These are the plans. I don't know what the heck was going on behind the scenes, and probably something like that was happening. But my point is, again, coming back to the leaks thing, why aren't we hearing any of those leaks? Why aren't any of those coming out? It's a good question to ask, because if there were major problems with where he was going, you would think, and they were genuinely concerned about it, wouldn't we have heard about it with all the leaks constantly? This is a big operation. This is our major international operation where we have boots on the ground, or a very long war that we've been in. You know what I mean? Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time, but we got to play a couple of those clips. That is big news yesterday. And we'll be coming back in a minute in our soapbox segment, Jamarl's monologue, short back and forth on the topic he chooses. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be right back.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I'm just going to say it. Betrayal. Betrayal. That's what I'm going to call it. You have a situation where for the longest time, nearly a year, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, and let's take Biden out of it for the moment because this is more of a congressional thing. They said, quote, we will, not a quote, paraphrasing, we will have a two-track method of passing the budget reconciliation infrastructure bill in addition to the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And the reason we're going to have a two-track solution for it is because many of the moderates and many of the corporate Democrats would be perfectly okay accepting the bipartisan bill. And they would probably only want the bipartisan bill. However, lefties understood that if they wanted to get Biden's agenda through, meaning the 3.5 reconciliation, then both needed to go, meaning it's all or it's nothing. You can't have it both ways. If you want us to back your bipartisan bill agenda, then you need to back our agenda. And again, that agenda is the exact same thing that Biden wants and the leadership in the House and the leadership in the Senate wants. And in both of these cases, Nancy Pelosi was very clear, this is what we're going to do. She understood that the Progressive Caucus was on board to kill the bill. At the very least, that's been a threat from day one. It's all or nothing. It's all or nothing. And at this point, after spending about 6 months saying that, all credibility in the world is dependent upon them killing that bill. So what's the problem and what's changed? Well, Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema has decided they don't want to back the president's agenda. Manchin, once before, on the $15 an hour minimum wage thing, basically says, yeah, I don't believe that our quote-unquote heroes are worth $15 an hour, so I'm not going to back the $15 an hour to each of our workers. That was the first time around, and even though you can lean on the parliamentarian for that, at the end of the day, that wasn't an issue for the parliamentarian. The party had the ability to get rid of the parliamentarian and go along with it. I said back then that Biden was basically allowing a monster to rummage through his presidency. And here we are. Again, this 3.5 trillion reconciliation bill is entirely a Democratic issue. They're not going to get Republican votes on it. The catch is they need everybody, though, in order to make it work. If I'm not mistaken, Nancy Pelosi can maybe use 2 or 3 in the House, but there are only 50 Democrats in the Senate, meaning they need each and every Democrat in the Senate to make that bill pass, in addition to Kamala Harris backing them on it. So that means that despite having a level of unity that is uncommon, especially, again, since many of the corporate moderates are backing this agenda, one member, or 2 in this case, is enough to basically kill it, to destroy Joe Biden's economic agenda. And that is basically what is taking place. Whatever you want to think about Joe Manchin, and I want to put him to the side for the moment, Kristen Sinema seems to be taking this in a particular way, meaning she's out there working for her constituents, those constituents being all of these industries and all of these big business types that are basically backing her and killing this bill, and is going to put a ton of money in her pocket to do so. NBC News even is reporting on this right here. On Tuesday, Kristen Sinema, while these guys are debating the bill, she's going to meet with 5 business lobbying groups, many of which oppose the bill. Influential National Association of Wholesale Distributors, Grocers, PAC, along with lobbyists for roofers, electrical contractors, small business groups called the S-Corp Political Action Committee, have invited association members to an undisclosed location on Tuesday afternoon for 45 minutes of check writing between $1,000 and $5,800 payable to Sinema for Arizona. She is going to make a killing the objectives of this president. And by the way, the overwhelming majority of the public backs it. Not just the overwhelming majority of the national public, the overwhelming majority of the public, even in Arizona and West Virginia, where these 2 members are located. The problem is straightforward. If progressives decide to vote on the bipartisan bill, then you are going to get corporate Democrats to basically say, all right, we're good with this. And they will not back. They were going to basically renege on the $3.5 trillion. And if you don't believe that's going to happen, well, they already have the deal. The bipartisan bill hasn't even been voting on yet. The other one hasn't been voting on yet. And despite both of these things being up in the air, they're already saying they're not going to vote for it. So what would be the impetus to vote for it the moment that you give over your vote for the bipartisan bill? There wouldn't be one. And therein lies the rub. They're trying to do a fast hand movement in regards to doing this. I want to play a clip from Manchin and Sanders. Let's hear Manchin first. This is Joe Manchin talking about the reconciliation.
That's a heavy lift. There's a lot to do and a lot to talk about, but everybody has to keep trying to work in good faith the best you can.
Do you think the leadership has been rushing this process at all and should take some time?
I'm not in control of the leadership. They're going to set the timetable, There's a lot in that bill, the 3.5, the reconciliation bill, tax codes, climate change, social reforms. There's a lot, and people need to know what's in it. So it's going to take a while.
It's going to take a while. People need to know what's in it. It's going to take a while. And let's go to Sanders for the moment, because this is what it basically boils down to. Biden's agenda is going to get killed if Manchin and Semina and the other types basically renege on what was an agreement to go with a dual track for both bills. This is going to injure not just Biden, it is going to also injure many of the members of the Democratic Party in the House and the Senate, many of which are moderates, and many of which recognize that their capacity to remain in office and to win again is going to be dependent upon whether or not people believe that their vote had some kind of weight in their wallet and pocket going forward. If neither of these passes, there is no way Democrats are going to keep the House, or for that matter, the Senate. Let's play Sanders, his response.
Are you making any progress there?
Well, I'm not, the answer is that is what is very troubling to me. The answer, I think, I'm not in the middle of all those negotiations, but Senators Sinema and Manchin, as I understand it, were in the White House today. From what I can hear from the reports is no. It goes on and on and on. We're talking and nothing is happening. And I think that's why it's important that we defeat the infrastructure bill in the House, and that if these guys want to see the infrastructure bill passed, they're going to have to deal with us in reconsideration.
And is that part of your worry, if the talks aren't really not progressing with the infrastructure bill still in limbo? Once the infrastructure bill is passed, then there'll be no motivation for them to talk.
That's about it, yes.
You heard what he said, right? Defeat the infrastructure bill in the House. And this has been no deviation from lefties and the Progressive Caucus also saying it's all or it's nothing. And they're still saying today, we will defeat both bills. I think there were 90 members in the Progressive Caucus. I think half of them were going to basically vote against the bill. At least that's the threat. And they haven't necessarily deviated from that. To make a point about the reason why I say this is somewhat of a betrayal, the overwhelming majority of the public backs it. And whatever the overwhelming majority of the public backs, you can imagine that the overwhelming majority of the Democratic Party backs it. That's what we're talking about here. And just to give some of the quotes, this is a survey in Arizona, Colorado, Virginia, West Virginia. Rebuilding America's water infrastructure, 77%. Ensuring the major public investments include requirements for products, technology, and materials that are made in America, and the jobs provide good pay and benefits, 77%. Rebuilding, retooling American manufacturing and modernizing our factories, build more products, clean technology, 72%. Strengthening and supporting America's human services workforce, including providers, frontline healthcare workers, and educators, 71%. Upgrading and modernizing our schools to save money through efficient or energy efficient and removing toxins from school environments. That's basically lead and water, 70%. Prioritizing investments in communities that need it the most, 68%. Setting stronger protections for organized labor, fair pay, and working conditions, 65%. And again, this is the majority of the population. This is the president's key mainline agenda. This is the thing that he basically campaigned on. This is the thing that he won on. And two, Democrats are basically going to kill it all. Shane, what are your thoughts?
Well, they're killing it all, but they didn't have the Democrats didn't actually have a factual majority in the first place, because Manchin specifically, but you can include Sinema too. They're both from purple states. They're both conservative, but we've been over this.
Manchin's red state.
Well, yeah, but thank you for that. But they elected a Democrat. He is definitely a Republican-leaning Democrat, the most Republican-leaning Democrat. So you get my point. But thank you for the correction there.
And to be fair, the reason why I pulled Manchin to the side for a bit, because Manchin does every so often, even though he aggravates me, does seem to would work towards a deal.
And I saw you retweeting something from Chris Hayes, who was sort of characterizing it too, where Manchin is a little bit more, he's willing to talk. He's in the negotiation process. And I think he was saying about Sinema that she's like alternating between a vineyard internship
pretty much,
and like lobbying meetings. So she's just living it up, basically.
And she's like, I'm not going to increase taxes on corporations or the rich.
And I'm going to drink wine.
Yeah, and I'm going to drink wine. And I'm going to get a ton of money for doing it. And keep in mind, part of the reason that they were increasing taxes was because they were going to pay for the bill. Like, their main point is, this is going to be paid for going forward. And she's just basically said, yeah, we're not going to do that.
But on the other hand, and we're going to go into a conversation with Ted here, so I don't want to take too long, because this is going to reassert itself in that conversation. I'm sure I will bring it back up. Don't you worry. But, if the idea is we're going to hold all legislation hostage until we get what we want, then isn't that going to come back to bite you in the butt if you don't actually have the votes to get what you want? If it's just holding it up, if you do what Sanders says and you just defeat it in the House, and then it gets stuck there and nothing gets done and the government gets shut down maybe, and It just gets long and drawn out.
That's a secondary conversation with the shutdown. I mean, that may even take place. Well, the thing is, though, politics is some level of negotiation. And if you're going to allow yourself to basically get walked on, or you're going to allow yourself to basically put out a threat and then not be able to live up to the threat, then you lose all sorts of political weight and all sorts of political credibility in dealing with your negotiations. It's a negotiation.
But our progressives at this point in the Senate and the House, aren't they? This is pretty cruel of me, maybe, but aren't they like what's the word that I'm looking for? Aren't
politically abused? Well, the equivalent of an abused spouse or something like that?
They're like the token progressives who are brought in or something into the establishment. So look, we're progressive, but then they don't actually have any power, you know, and Pelosi basically can get the ones in the House to do whatever she wants them to do. And that is where the progressives are.
Look, kind of, yes. I mean, I don't think that's unfair to say. But the thing is, in this very specific case, though, they had agreement. Like, this is not like in the old days where progressives were like, we want to do this. And they're like, yeah, no, we don't want that. This is one of those cases where after COVID, you seem to have many of the moderates who said, you know what, we'll do that. And you have Biden saying, yeah, I want to do that. And you have Chuck Schumer and Pelosi saying, we want to do that.
There's one other thing that I want to bring in, which is sort of related, and it's on the subject of Pelosi specifically. This is from Justin Amash a couple of days ago. Basically, he's looking at the how many votes have been allowed on floor-offered amendments versus pre-screened amendments. So basically ones that Pelosi would have pre-screened or not, basically.
Yeah.
And 2011, there were 414 floor-offered amendments. 2012, 153. 2013, 61. So the numbers are going down quickly.
Yeah.
2014, 96, going back up. 2015, 94. 2016, 29. Wow. That's getting really low. 2017, 0. That was for the first time in American history. 2018, 0. 2019, 0. 2020, 0. 2021, 0. For the first time in American history back in 2017, I will note Trump's presidency, the first full year of Trump's presidency, there were 0 amendments that weren't pre-screened by Pelosi. That is her iron grip on the House. It's a segue maybe, but it's just a relevant fact I wanted to throw in while we're having this convo.
Well, they always say Pelosi knows her votes. She's not going to bring anything that's going to basically lose. But honestly, this bill may lose. That's the catch. I mean, look, one or two things is going to happen. This bill was supposed to be brought up, meaning both simultaneously, and Pelosi basically said, well, the factors on the ground changed. Well, facts on the ground didn't change. You just basically went back on your word. And more importantly, them bringing it up on Thursday, look, if lefties are still true to that and saying, no, look, it's all or nothing, that vote is going to lose. And so the catch becomes, what is Pelosi going to do? And is she just going to pull the bill after the fact when she realizes they're not going to let this go through? Wow, that's a good stat.
Well, you know what John Maynard Keynes said, when the facts don't change, I change my mind, sir. I just changed it based on nothing. No, that's itself a false quote.
Well, she changed her mind, all right.
Quite the opposite. We've got to go into a break. We'll be coming back in a minute with Ted Rall, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist. Great guy. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with Ted on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And the conversation we had earlier for the monologue, we might as well keep that conversation going. Basically, a $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill that, even though I may not necessarily use the words transformative, is definitely significant and non-trivial in regards to what is going to be in that bill. Everything from child care, everything to expanding Medicare, everything from expanding Medicare from the standpoint of the number of people who are on it, clean water, environmental policy. It is an expansive bill. And for the longest time, for about 6 months, the agreement was that that bill and the infrastructure bill were going to run in tandem to one another. Well, that is no longer true. And it seems like it's not true because there are two Democrats specifically that have decided it's not true in the Senate. Well, the Progressive Caucus are sticking to their guns and basically said it's all or nothing. They've been saying this for 6 months. And credibility on some level demands that they stand by that particular threat. If you are not going to back the $3.5 trillion reconciliation, then we are not going to back your infrastructure bill. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. Ted, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jamarl.
So I call this a betrayal. Now, do you consider this a betrayal? Is betrayal too strong here? And I mean this specifically on a few counts. Specifically, Semina, definitely, considering that the overwhelming majority of Democrats back Biden's agenda, even in her own state of Arizona. If I'm not mistaken, they even were going to censure her for basically not backing the agenda. I mean, there were even threats for that. And so there's that part. But there's also this part of Nancy Pelosi basically going back on her word to take both of these bills up at the same time. And if you're going to lose it either way, meaning if the progressives actually kill that bill on Thursday, she's going to lose it. If that's the case, if you're going to lose it either way, shouldn't you lose it by sticking to your guns in regards to what you said you were going to do the first time around? What are your thoughts? Is it a betrayal, or is betrayal too strong?
I think it's the inevitable result of the structure of this legislation and dividing it up into two bills. I think a few months ago we talked about this, about the decision to split it up, and I think I said at the time that I thought this would lead to trouble, and exactly the kind of trouble that we're seeing now. I mean, it was kind of like a too cute by half solution.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to do it two different ways, and, don't worry, progressives, we got your back. But, we've seen this before. Democrats have taken things out of legislation, like, for example, $15 minimum wage, and they said, don't worry, we'll come back to you later, and someday never comes. And so, progressives know that. AOC has made a statement that I don't think she can possibly walk back about threatening to withhold her vote and presumably the squad's vote on the corporate plan.
Well, not just her. I mean, you're talking about like the Progressive Caucus. Premier Jayapal has been very clear that she has her constituency. I think she says like 50 or half of the Progressive Caucus that's going to vote this bill down if they go through without bringing up $3.5 trillion reconciliation, or if they split it up that way.
I think they have to. I mean, progressives at this point have played nice, and they can't play nice and still be considered progressives, in any kind of meaningful sense of the word. They kind of have to, as Molly Ivins say, dance with them that run them, and that's progressive voters, left-leaning voters in their districts. And they're not going to be pleased. They're not going to turn out for them next time if they don't carry out this threat. So, I think it was madness to split this up in the first place, and something like this was inevitable.
But I want to walk this through here. Playing mean means defying Nancy Pelosi. In other words, the opposite of playing nice. Playing mean, basically defying the will of the grand god Pelosi. What would come out of that? What do you think? Because it seems to me that would earn them some enmity from Pelosi and the majority of the Democrats in the House. They wouldn't have any friends in Republicans, of course. So they're going to be isolated at that point. And then who do they fall on? They fall on voters who sadly are disengaged. This is the whole old conversation, but what's your take on it, Ted?
Yeah, I mean, look, they're between a rock and a hard place. I think that they have no choice but to defy Pelosi, and that it will end up leaving them isolated. Or you might get some sort of version of what happened after 2016 when the party moved to the left after some of the Bernie Sanders primary voters failed to turn out for Hillary Clinton. And Pelosi and her allies realized that they really do have to make some stops to progressives going forward. That could happen. This could go either way, but I definitely they're taking a big risk, but they have to take a big risk because the alternative is even worse.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, and like I said, I don't think it's not just the squad. Like, it's not just the 6 members. I mean, it's one of those things where the squad by themselves is enough to kill it. I mean, I think Pelosi can only get away with 3 members, 3 or 4, and there's about 8 members of the squad. But it seems to be deeper than that. I mean, it seems to be like 40 people. That's assuming Jayapal is not lying about the support she has to kill the bill if they don't back it up. I'm curious. There is nothing that they have at their disposal as a stick to go after Manchin or Semina with. And again, I'm putting Manchin to the side just for a bit because I know he's in a deep red state. There's nothing that they have at their disposal for Semina. I mean, it just seems like the idea that one Democrat will make the choice, so two Democrats will make the choice to basically kill the agenda for the entirety of the party and the president that they have large buy-in on is astonishing to me. It seems like there will be consequences. I just don't know what those consequences are.
I don't think there will be consequences. I think they run the party because of the way that the Democratic Party has structured this particular house of cards. The mentality is that you can always count on the sure votes, and that the votes you care about are the wobbly votes. And that's been the case for decades. This used to be Joe Lieberman's role. There were never any negative consequences until he got primaried, and then he ran as independent and won again, and then caucused with the Republicans. So there were never any consequences, and this has been the case for as long as I've been alive, and I'm almost 60 years old. I think that until there's a radical reconsideration within the Democratic Party, both on the grassroots level and in Washington, that starts to say, look, if you're a wobbly vote, we don't really count you. When Nancy Pelosi counts votes and when Schumer counts votes, they should look at people like Manchin and say, well, that's an ish, but we can't count on those. Because otherwise, if you count on them, then you have to give them whatever they want.
But, this is somewhat different, though, right? I mean, for the longest time, you've had a situation where the left would have their own policy agenda, and it would be roundly ignored, where the left would basically back whatever random Democrat would be up or put up, and they would take it as almost their philosophical responsibility to back people who in no way would back their agenda or support their agenda. Well, after Sanders, and for this time around, especially after COVID, you had a lot of the moderates that basically said, all right, we're on board, which is shocking. I mean, that's not necessarily something that typically takes place. You basically had the leadership of the party and the president on board for the same, let's say, policy agenda. And I get that Sanders wanted, like $6 trillion or something like that. They ended up at about $4 trillion. But to have that much of a buy-in, I guess the question goes in two fronts. Why this time around is there so much buy-in with the bulk of the party, where it seems like even the moderates and some of the Democrats on the right have basically said, okay, fair enough, we'll accept this. And on the secondary point, if that is true, which it is, I mean, they have mass support, how can there not be consequences? I guess, and I don't mean to be too stick-to-itive to that. I mean, but that seems, because otherwise there's no ability to compel other members of the party to fall in line, even when the overwhelming majority of the party is falling in line, and even when it depends, or the president's agenda is going to rise and fall on them falling in line. I mean, that just seems to be insane to me. I mean, but tell me if I'm wrong.
Insanity is sort of what leads to crisis, right? I mean, the Democratic Party, first of all, the country needs to pour more money into the economy because it's still reeling from COVID. The Democratic Party needs a big win, and the country has to increase the debt ceiling. But we may not. But none of those things may happen because that's what a crisis is when everybody knows what they're supposed to do. For example, stop relying on fossil fuels, and they just don't, due to a comedy of errors and stupidity and short-sightedness and just political self-interest colliding. And that's what's happening here. Nobody here is really coming together for the good of the party or the good of the country. They will let this car crash potentially because they don't like they don't like what will happen to them personally if they don't. And it's terrifying. But
why isn't she concerned about if she does? I mean, Semina is basically at a wine fundraiser or whatever, getting $5,800 checks from people who are basically against the president's agenda. Now, considering Biden did win Arizona, considering that the majority of the people in Arizona backed this policy, I mean, I went through the polling earlier, where it's like 72% for rebuilding American manufacturing and factories, 71% strengthening and supporting human services of the workforce, like frontline healthcare workers and educators, upgrading and modernizing our schools to save money through energy efficiency and removing toxins. Again, that's like lead, that's 70%. Prioritizing investment to communities that need it the most, including low income communities and communities of color, that's 6 to 8%. Rebuilding America's water infrastructure to have cleaner, safer water delivered more efficiently and removing hazards from lead pipes, 77%. I mean, the bill is popular across the board. Why is she not concerned about consequences for her own seat if she kills this? That's the part that eludes me more than anything else.
Well, she's kind of bought and paid for it, right, by the interest to oppose this legislation. And there's solutions here. You know, I was thinking about how the Democratic Party, you know, the DNC could guarantee Sinema and Manchin and say, look, you know, if your fundraising falls off a cliff because you guys get on board, don't worry. We can transfer money from the National Party. We can have our bundlers shift funds over to you. We've got your back. We can't really guarantee votes, but we can make sure that you can have the money to buy the votes, in so many words, and that should work as an incumbent. So, I mean, there are ways around this, but I don't know. You know, obviously that kind of discussion may be happening behind the scenes. I would be surprised if there was no discussion like that. But it's obviously just, you know, Sinema and Manchin, I mean, Sinema in particular, just use this as her self-interest. And this is what she's, you know, this is where she's at. It's got to tilt in the other direction for her to change her mind.
Ted, you're a student of history. You're a student specifically of political history, and this has been revealed over multiple conversations we've had where you've brought up references from the 19th century that neither Jamarl or I recognized, and it's impressed us. And clearly, over the course of conversations, you've impressed us generally with your knowledge, which is why I'm setting that all up to give you the ethos, to ask you, what would you do if you were an impartial political consultant, or if you were a partial political consultant, partial to the progressives, and you were like, guys, this is the best call here. Here's what you should do. Here's how you should talk to Pelosi. Here's what you should be pushing for. That whole thing. I know I'm putting a lot on you, but you just gave a couple of hints about other options here. What would you do, Ted?
Well, I mean, okay, so I'm going to punt a little bit and say that
completely fair.
I wouldn't be in this position. You know, if the party were following my advice, I would say that, you know, that Schumer could not have counted those votes. They are not ready to vote. They are not going to win. They've got to put together a coalition from somewhere else. They don't have a coalition of the willing, as Bush would say. But okay, now that you're in this position that you've painted yourself into a corner, you're going to have to cut your bill back, and you're going to probably have to throw. I mean, I would tell Pelosi she's going to have to throw progressives under the bus. That's kind of just where she is. That's where it's a ridiculous position to be in because they're the future of the party. But that's, you know, they made a stupid decision by splitting these two bills and by not making it more attractive to Republicans and allowing them to. I mean, I think from the start they should have made this a bipartisan piece of legislation and allowed Republicans to take co-credit for it. Instead, you've got Republicans who obviously don't have the buy-in, and they're just singing the old, you know, deficit hawk song that they always sing whenever it's the Democrats' turn to spend some money, and that they have completely collected amnesia whenever they're spending tons of taxpayer money. So, you know, I think this is a move. I don't like to counsel it, but I think it's a pivot to the right, and I don't think there's any way around it.
Ted, why do you believe that Republicans will buy in on this bill? I mean, during the Obama administration, it was unyielding opposition to even stuff that they backed at one point. And it's like that didn't necessarily seem to change or deviate going into the Biden administration. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, okay, Obama was a blimp on the radar, and then we're moving on to Biden, and now they're all of a sudden going to be more kumbaya. It didn't seem to have any level of buy-in at all, meaning it didn't seem like there was going to be the potential for buy-in anyway. Not to mention, I mean, these got the group that you're saying should have gotten buy-in is about to crash the debt ceiling. I mean, we're talking about millions of jobs lost, trillions of dollars off of the wealth within the context of the United States, stock market cut in half. I mean, they're calling this financial Armageddon, and McConnell is very serious, seemingly anyway, about going over the debt ceiling. How are you going to get that group that's willing to basically destroy the full faith and credit of the United States to buy in on an economic agenda where they seem to have no interest in buying into?
I think at the beginning, Biden's people and McConnell and the Republican top leadership needed to put their heads together and say, look, the country is going to collapse The economy has been completely shut down for over a year. There are still major cities like where I live in New York City that people aren't talking about it, but there's massive vacancy in residential and commercial real estate. The stock market is just being completely propped up with duct tape and baling wire. If we don't put a lot of money into the economy, the whole thing, there's not going to be a U.S. Congress anymore. There won't be a U.S. government. This whole place is going to collapse. So we're going to do this thing. We have to do it. Why don't you do it with us? And we won't even beat you up or even brag in the midterms that we did this. We'll say that we did it together. We'll give you co-credit. Let's stimulate the economy together. I think it's a different way of looking at politics, but that's not, obviously that's not the way of the world in Washington these days. But they do this sort of thing. For example,
Republicans will raise taxes. I mean, because that's basically the plan, right? I mean, Biden is trying to pay for it, and he wants to increase corporate taxes, and he wants to increase taxes on the wealthy. And I think he says that no one making under $400,000 a year is going to get an increase. That means he's basically going for the wealthy. Will Republicans be willing to increase taxes to pay for the bill?
Well, obviously, the only question is who's going to pay the higher taxes. Taxes always go up. The question is it going to be the middle class, or is it going to be the wealthy, or is it going to be business? But you spend more money, yeah, you're going to have to raise more taxes, and obviously you can borrow more money. I mean, Paul Krugman makes a credible case week after week in the pages of the New York Times that there's really kind of no limit to how high the debt can go, really.
There you go. And that is the realpolitik calculation from Ted Rall here. Now, here's the thing. You don't like any of that, do you, Ted?
No, I don't like any of it. I think they put themselves into a ridiculous position. And, so when you have a bunch of stupid people making decisions, you end up with stupid results.
Oh, man, that's brutal. You know what? There's another side of this, another stupid decision, and this is admittedly from another vein, but I just want to go back to a thread earlier on in the conversation. We were talking about progressives. We were talking about the left moment back in 2017, 2016, 2018, the rise of the squad, the success of Bernie Sanders in the primaries is being pushed out, and the progressive wave that you pointed to earlier. I brought that all up as preface. What about the Met Gala? What about the recent embarrassment of AOC, who has become the most amicable figurehead of the squad? She's like the face of it. And then she does this stuff. And for political watchers, this is just embarrassing, the most embarrassing move, shameful. I don't want to lead the witness. What did you think about the Met Gala thing? And do you take my point? Where would you go with it, Ted?
It was definitely a misfire. I can totally see how it happened, but it's hard to believe that someone who used to have such good instincts, was led astray by this idea. It's one of those things like, over Chardonnay, it sounds like a good idea. In the morning you wake up.
What did I do? What did I do? Well, sitting in such soft reclining chairs, being so comfortable, it tends to ruin your spine. And it seems like it did the same thing with AOC. But if that's what it led to, then isn't that going to be the thought of pretty much everybody? Okay, you say you're progressive. But. We see what AOC did. We see how she's turned. Even, Jamarl, he didn't bring it up over the mic. He kind of whispered it under his breath. But the Iron Dome vote, of course, with her crying at the end of it after being forced, or whatever. I can't say forced. After she changed her vote from a no to a present. Those are a couple of things in pretty quick succession there that, admittedly, it has to do with AOC specifically, but it does reflect more widely upon the squad. Isn't that like a massive obstacle going forward for the reputation, the credibility of future progressive leaders? And coming back to the sort of practical angle, if you whatever your take is on it, how do you think they should handle that? How do you think future progressive candidates, local leaders, that kind of thing, what should they do with that?
On the one hand, it's a bad look. On the other hand, 1% of the voters are paying attention and even know that this incident even happened. The attention span of the voters is short. The knowledge base is shallow. Probably most people never even knew about this. So if I were AOC in the squad, I would just brush this stuff off. There's just sort of a general, they've been branded successfully. They are the squad. They are progressive. They care about ordinary people. They're going to have to screw up optically and practically a lot more often, a lot bigger, before that brand completely is tarnished and goes away. People like us, on the other hand, obviously are aware of it, and we talk about it. And that's going to move the needle for a lot of people as well. So, I think it's not like, oh, they're screwed. They've lost all their credibility. I don't think that at all. But they can't keep this up over the long run. In the end, they're going to have to deliver. And as I've argued before, they're never going to be able to because, after all, they're inside the Democratic Party where progressivism goes to die.
Well, I partly agree, but I don't know if I agree completely, and I kind of wanted to push back on this. When you first said, we're in the 1% of people paying attention to this, I always like feeling special, so I was like, well, yes, that's very right. You're right. Most people don't pay attention to this stuff, that kind of thing. But maybe there's something a little bit that it feels a little bit outdated to me. If I'm on Twitter, admittedly, it's my Twitter. I follow political people, and so I tend to see political things. But I'm seeing these tweets get a lot of likes and a lot of shares, and there's this percolation that happens. I think in modern society that maybe, I don't know, maybe we haven't caught up to yet, where it might start in those communities, but over the next couple of years, those memes, and there are a lot of memes, those are going to reassert themselves. I don't want to take this stuff too seriously, but basically the idea that it percolates quite effectively through social media from whoever's paying attention to the vast majority of people who are vaguely interested in politics, I can see that kind of thing having major long-lasting ripples in our political system. I think that people might remember this stuff in a weird way, even though we have such short attention spans. You can see it with the whole cancel culture debate, another thing where, decades-old tweets or posts or comments are revived. Even though we have a short attention span, things can get brought back up just like that so immediately that I'm not sure we're going to forget it so quickly, and I'm not sure that we're the only ones who are paying attention to it or will come election season. Ed, what's your take?
Look, I agree with you. Those things could come back to bite them. There's no question that could happen, but I think the branding is such that where the hell else are you going to go, right? I mean, in the two-party trap, if you're a liberal, you have to vote Democratic to keep the evil Republicans out. And within the Democratic Party, if you're progressive, you have to support the squad. Otherwise, the evil corporatists take over the Democratic Party. So, there's a trap within a trap. I think at this point, people are going to continue to make excuses for them the same way that, most Democrats make excuses for Democrats. It's
very fractal, Ted. Very fractal, the microcosm within the macrocosm thing. Jamarl, what do you think?
I guess, do you think that remains true if they end up voting for this bill? Meaning, after spending 6 months, give or take, basically saying we're going to kill this bill if you don't bring both of them together, and they turn around and end up, Mama Bear, Pelosi, ends up getting them to vote for a bill that they said they were going to kill while basically not getting $3.5 trillion. I mean, would that get to the point of the loss of credibility be so devastating that, what Shane is saying here, meaning if they turn around and vote for something that they said they were going to kill after not getting what they wanted in regards to their reconciliation, that's somewhat of a, I call them doormats, but that's a smear on doormats in that situation.
I don't think they can. I've said that before. I don't think there's any way, shape, or form after they walked all the way out onto the edge to the end of this branch, to this limb, that they can possibly walk back. They have to saw it off. They just cannot vote for this bill.
Mama Bear, it's not going to get what she wants this time.
Not this time. I don't think so.
The voice that you guys are listening to is Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And by the way, you can find Ted Rall on Twitter at Ted Rall and read his cartoons and articles at raw.com. Every time I say cartoonist, I always feel like he's so much more. I mean, from the traveling to Afghanistan to the, this encyclopedic knowledge of history and everything else, Rall is phenomenal.
Ted, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It was really good talking.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Really quickly, you a fan of Calvin and Hobbes? You ever read Calvin and Hobbes?
I think he's gone.
Reading it this week.
You're reading it this week? I'm just trying to connect over something real briefly. We've got to close it out, though. Great comic book for anybody who's read it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Going into our break, we'll be back in a minute with headlines and the last 2 hours of this morning show. We'll be right back on the other side of this short break.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All righty, let's get to the headlines. Great conversation with Ted. In the news, yesterday in the United States, there were 104,903 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,178 deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 114,395 cases per day, a decrease of 26% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 56% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, up from 55% yesterday, and 64% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 43,205,257 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 692,737 men, women, and children in this country. Between 2019 and 2021, prescriptions for ivermectin have risen more than 70%. The greatest increases were seen in Idaho, New Mexico, Wyoming, where the prescription increased by 258%, 216%, and 204%, respectively. That is insanity. And yet, here we are. I also want to hit one more story before we leave this one, and it had to do with long-term COVID. And basically, it was a report that came out of the UK saying that like 70% of the people with long-term COVID experienced some kind of organ damage. I mean, that's extraordinary stuff. And there's so many consequences for COVID that it's so unpredictable. In national news, during testimony yesterday from top generals speaking before the Senate Armed Services Committee, military officials contradicted claims by Biden that it was not recommended to him to keep troops on the ground in Afghanistan. We actually have this clip. Guys, I'm going to give you a moment to pull the clip up. But we were talking about this a little bit earlier today. Basically, Tom Cotton asked Joe Biden whether or not, asked his military generals, it was Lloyd Austin, and I believe it was Milley, there's one other gentleman that was there with him, whether or not he was told to keep generals there or recommended that he keeps people on the ground. Biden basically said nobody told him that. Let's play the clip.
General Milley, it's your testimony that you recommended 2,500 troops approximately stay in Afghanistan?
As I've said many times before this committee and other committees, I don't share my personal recommendations to the president, but I can tell you my personal opinion and my assessment if that's what you want.
Yes, please.
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution.
Did you ever present that assessment personally to President Biden?
I don't discuss exactly what my conversations are with the sitting president in the Oval Office, but I can tell you what my personal opinion was, and I'm always candid.
General McKenzie, do you share that assessment?
Senator, I do share that assessment.
Did you ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
Again, I'm not going to be able to comment on those executive discussions.
Did General Miller ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
I think it would be best to ask him. I believe that his opinion was well heard.
Secretary Austin, President Biden last month in an interview with George Stephanopoulos said that no military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence in Afghanistan. Is that true?
Senator Cotton, I believe that, well, first of all, I know the president to be an honest and forthright man. And secondly,
it's a simple question, Secretary Austin. He said no senior military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence behind. Is that true or not? Did these officer and General Miller's recommendations get to the president personally?
Their input was received by the president and considered by the president for sure. In terms of what they specifically recommended, Senator, as they just said, they're not going to provide what they recommended in confidence.
I mean, it sounds to me, it's shocking to me. It sounds to me like maybe their best military advice was never presented personally to the President of the United States about such a highly consequential matter.
Yeah, that's a brutal cross-examination by Tom Cotton. Let's keep going. The White House is touting success in their vaccination attempts. The publicized findings that show, or there are publicized findings that show nearly identical vaccination rates across ethnic groups. The report by the Kaiser Family Foundation found that 71% of whites, 70% of African Americans, 73% of Latinos have gotten vaccinated. Chief Pandemic Response Coordinator Jeff Zaitis stated, quote, "We know our work isn't done, but this is an important progress," unquote. Starting Friday, the Postal Service will, quote, "implement new service standards for first-class mail and periodicals," unquote. Why does Joy still have this job? That's a side point. I'm sorry. But let me go back. I'm sorry. Starting Friday, the Postal Service will, quote, "implement new service standards for first-class mail and periodicals," unquote. The changes mean an increase in transit time for long-distance mail. Most first-class mail will not be slowed, but the UPS has suffered detrimental employment numbers since the start of the pandemic. Not to mention, since DeJoy has taken over, and that Biden has basically left him in that role to do damage to the post office. Yesterday, YouTube blocked RT German's account over claims of coronavirus misinformation. Russia, in response, has threatened to block YouTube in the country if it didn't restore the banned channels. RT's editor-in-chief called the ban, quote, "a real media war declared by the state of Germany to the state of Russia," unquote. We're trying to get somebody on to talk about that. That's somewhat of a big deal. Look, as somebody who has a YouTube channel and has had my own issues with YouTube, in fact, we can come back and talk about it. Following Joe Biden's refusal to meet with Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan during the UN General Assembly, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Erdogan are meeting in Sochi, Russia this morning. This follows comments by Erdogan that Turkey will buy a second batch of the S-400 missile defense system. Immediately after the comments was made, the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations warned that the new purchase by Turkey would mean new sanctions under Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, designed to deter adversaries from hostile actions. So basically, Turkey is not a sovereign nation. That's amazing. North Korea has claimed it has successfully tested a new hypersonic missile called the Hwasong-8. They claim the missile was a strategic weapon, which usually means it has nuclear capabilities. And last, today is National Coffee Day, and many prominent chains are giving freebies to celebrate. Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, Wawa, Krispy Kreme, and many more are participating, so stop in your local coffee shop for free donuts and coffee today only. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, I'm always bothered by this thing of this belief that for whatever reason, Turkey is not a sovereign nation. It's like, we don't like the fact that you're buying weapons from another country. Let's be very clear. The issue here is not that they're buying weapons. The issue is that they're not buying weapons from us. And we're basically using this kind of political levers in order to get into what is supposed to be a just capitalistic exchange between these two parties, both of which are sovereign nations, both of which can make determinations on what they want to do in regards to their weapons. It is an amazing jump of the shark to say that one sovereign power is buying weapons from another sovereign power, and we don't like it because we would prefer that you buy them from us. So we are going to put sanctions on your country for not buying weapons from us. I mean, you're basically, if I'm not even sure if that's legal under international law. You're basically using threats of economic harm and economic damage in order to try to compel somebody to not do business with a sovereign nation. That's astonishing. And the media just reports this stuff like it's no big deal. That's profound. I mean, imagine if China said, we don't like the fact that you back Saudi Arabia in that bloody, vicious war where they are basically murdering and starving Yemenis to death. And so we're not going to negotiate with you and trade with you, and we're going to pass sanctions on various items that you need from us, maybe rare earth minerals or something else. They don't do that. We do that. I mean, I'm just always enamored. Like, I'm always astonished by the ease of which sanctions have been used to influence business choices and business decisions, where it goes beyond this notion of, okay, we don't particularly like this actor, but at the end of the day, it's a capitalistic exchange. Well, no, not anymore. We're going to pass sanctions to prevent a NATO country from getting weapons from a country we don't particularly like and we're at odds with. I just find it to be astonishing.
It is. It's not a good move. Well, on another side of here, we're keeping Turkey from doing this, but also we're still, it's still calling Russia an adversary, which on the one hand makes sense, but on the other hand, I thought that the game plan at this point that we were reading kind of implicitly was to pivot away from Russia and towards China and court Russia in the long term as a potential ally, or at least as a neutral party, trying to get them, wean them away from the Chinese bloc, you know what I mean?
Right.
Which is probably a failing strategy, but regardless, I thought that was the game plan. But no,
supposed to be the plan.
Still calling them adversaries, still trying to keep Turkey away from them. Yeah. I keep being reminded. My brain goes to Brave, but I've said this kind of thing too before. But he was the one who most recently said it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like there's a person in charge of our policy. It's like
factions of power or something.
Internal factions in every major agency relevant to the conversations that we're having, whether you're talking about the State Department or the Pentagon or the CIA or even the executive branch inside the White House, of which Biden is nominally the leader.
Yeah.
And he can get some stuff done. Like he did this whole bungled Afghanistan thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you get my point. There's no leader here. And so it's like all the motivations of people who were raised over the past, couple of decades, certain climates, they're bringing those attitudes to bear in the present climate. You're always, on the one hand, you're always going to be trying to, you're always basing what you're doing right now on previous habit.
Yep.
And those habits are always attuned to an old environment that you've outgrown. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're always adapting in some sense to a past that's already vanished. But it can get there's like that, and then it can get that much worse where you're 50 years out of line or 100 years out of line or whatever. That's the true extreme of it.
It's like there's never a reorganization to accommodate the new environment that you're basically presented with.
Like the French defending themselves against the Germans in World War II based on the trench warfare tactics that they'd used in World War I a couple of decades previously. That's a classic example that a lot of people are familiar with. But of course, the same thing would apply here, where you have military leaders, diplomatic leaders, their staff, all of whom are, even if they're new hires, who are they trained by, of course?
Exactly.
And inevitably, people who are older hires who are used to seeing things and doing things in ways that fit a couple of decades ago, maybe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's like there's a structural incentive to keep moving in a particular direction because that's what you know. That's your safe space in a sense. But like you said, the example with France is actually quite good. I mean, you have this kind of new reality of things that the people haven't necessarily accommodated yet, that you have to grapple with. It's almost like we're always moving forward, but by the same token, we're kind of stick-to-itive to things that we were doing in the past. I want to get to the YouTube thing, because the YouTube thing is somewhat of a big deal. I've had my own experiences with YouTube that are maddening, and that's to put it mildly. Once before, YouTube took down my channel. I forget what it was for. It might have been for January 6th or something like that, but they took down the channel, and YouTube just sends this kind of bland letter, hey, you've breached our guidelines on violent, harmful, or content and misinformation. Okay, what video did it? Well, you have to go through your video list and figure it out yourself and pull it down. Yeah, but if you're not going to tell me what it is, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I don't even accept what you're saying as your premise. YouTube, over the course of several days, let's say 2 or 3 days, comes back, starts the channel back up, and says, our bad, we were a little overly aggressive in taking the channel down. And it wasn't just me, it was multiple people who they did this stuff. I'm not mistaken, Ford Fisher was one. Ford Fisher was one of the journalists that went out there and recorded the information on January 6th. Congress used that information in their impeachment of Donald Trump, despite the fact that they ripped his page off or ripped his site down for putting it up there like that. And if I'm not mistaken, gave him a strike or something. This is the stuff that YouTube does. They're unaccountable. They oftentimes don't have anybody to deal with because, again, they're the only game in town in regards to having this kind of channel that pays and everything else. So they basically have a monopoly on this particular market.
Well, they're the biggest game in town. I don't want to, I completely get what you're saying.
From the standpoint of the money thing, there's nobody else that does it. I mean, maybe Rofkin, but Rofkin gives.
And then there's Odyssey. There are these other platforms.
But do they pay? That's the catch.
I think they do, but do they pay a lot? But, and is it at scale in the way that people can go into YouTube expecting to make millions?
Exactly.
Which is why I say maybe. That's why I'm trying to qualify it slightly.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, monopoly, okay, if we were taking with the strictest terms of monopoly, meaning it's only one.
Not, but I completely get, de facto, it pretty much is.
But they have such weight and such gravity that they don't have to pay attention to pretty much anybody. I mean, they can make any decision that's unaccountable. They can change their rule set, and you're basically stuck with it. And any notion of pushing back on them can't, it's like you don't even have a person to talk to.
No.
That's not even a person to call or anything else. The best you can do is send an email that they're going to send you an email in response saying, Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
It's very aggravating.
It is. And you know what? We were talking about this yesterday in the studio. I hadn't even been aware of this. But By Any Means Necessary, another show on Radio Sputnik. I actually started out at Sputnik as their audio engineer. Anyway, By Any Means Necessary, they were like taken off of YouTube for 2 weeks, I think, based on something that doesn't even make sense. If you listen to By Any Means Necessary, they're a pretty left-leaning show.
Right.
And I think YouTube banned one of their videos or something like this and then took their channel down for 2 weeks based on what YouTube said was like trying to deny the election, the 2020 election.
Yep.
But if you listen to By Any Means Necessary, like I just said,
they're not going to do that.
They're not fans of Trump.
No.
They're not even remotely close to fans of Trump. Not that they're necessarily fans of Biden either, but my point is they're not in the pro-Trump 2020 was a false flag election overthrown thing.
I don't believe they would ever do that.
They're not
Neither one of them would ever do something like that.
Exactly. So it didn't even apply.
Yeah.
And going back, going back, they couldn't find an example of, okay, this was what YouTube was specifically pissed about. So there are these like hair triggers.
By the way, YouTube wouldn't give it.
And YouTube doesn't, like you were saying. Right. It's a wall. It's like a wall of text. They give you these short messages. They tell you in a broad sense, okay, this is why we've taken your video down or demonetized you or banned you or whatever. They give you in a broad sense why it is, but there's no recourse. You often can't find specifically what they're talking about. It often doesn't actually apply.
That's right.
It's like an algorithmic hair trigger that you don't have any real recourse to respond to. And if we had other options, we would just switch to those other options. But because it's a de facto monopoly, because that's where the people are, this is like the weird subtle gray zone in the whole conversation around these types of platforms, whether we're talking about social media or YouTube, any major tech giant, which technically doesn't have a monopoly.
Yeah.
If they technically had a monopoly, they would be definitely susceptible to antitrust on a large scale. And of course, they kind of are. We see states attorneys general across the country pushing in different antitrust cases, handful of them now. But because they're technically not yet considered legally a monopoly or whatever, we don't have that recourse. And yet we also are faced with no other options. And so that's the whole thing. Don't know what you do with it.
It is very aggravating. And I got to be honest, I'm not sure what you do with it. But this has been in the making for a while. And, it is amazing that they went as far as to kill both of those channels. And again, I would be greatly curious about what they're calling misinformation or whatever else. Because again, oftentimes it is not what they're saying it is. And oftentimes they don't even give you examples to indicate what it is. Because if they give you an example, they have to basically defend the example that they gave you. And so that is not something they typically do. Let's go to this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
Like beer? Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the report.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the Washington, D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and a course. You can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We're trying to get someone on to talk about the Google issue, and we will have somebody at the very least by 8:30 and potentially by a little bit earlier. But we're receiving and we're going to accept phone calls right now. Like I said, the number is 202-521-1320. We can talk about pretty much anything we've spoken about today and maybe potentially a little bit of leeway in regards to other topics. But right now we have Michael from Silver Springs. Michael, what's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going, fellas? I was trying to get on the past couple of days, but my comment is about just the World Wide Web. to me, when I look at it, to me, the World Wide Web is the monopoly. That's the monopoly. That's just what it is. And then these big companies, Facebook and Google, they're basically like subcontracted. They all work. It's all one big organization. And
well, Michael, who owns the internet or the World Wide Web? I mean, it's almost like saying the streets are a monopoly, if that makes sense. It's like, yes, it's a platform or it's a space for things or reality to interact and everything else. But you have individual actors on that stage that have companies and businesses and everything else. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, but I'm saying from a technical standpoint, like the World Wide Web is open. There is no such thing as really like hacking or anything. It's just the World Wide Web is just a technology, and people are creating their own space. But it's always just naturally open.
But I'll put it like this, man: the world is open. You know, before mankind colonized the world, you had places all over. You could go and you could settle wherever you wanted to. And then eventually we populated these spaces. We built houses on them often. We put locks on those houses. And people would break in through the lock into the house and steal our stuff. And that's kind of, you know, how I think of hacking, is people have colonized the internet. They've created these spaces. They've built them up. They want to protect them. Other people use them. You know, imagine if instead of a house it were a business. If anybody could come in and ransack any business, then they would probably do that pretty often. And you know, I think you might get where I'm going with this. In other words, you know, even though the internet might be an open medium, people have built on it, and we're sort of dependent on the things they've built on it. And that is, you know, that's a breach. That hacking stuff does happen. That's real. What's your take on that, Michael?
I agree, Shane. I agree. But I mean, everyone is in it together. Like the tech, like, you know what I mean? Like when you build on it, in this specific example with the Google, the technology, World Wide Web, when you build on it, how is it that the languages are universal? Everything is worldwide. Everyone's collaborating. So it's a monopoly. It's like it's a business. It's a technology that one person controls. And everybody, Facebook, they say, okay, this is what I want. And then Facebook is subject to the World Wide Web. Whoever is the one person that controls it. That's how really everything works. I think you guys are right. It's a different way of looking at it.
It's a different way of looking at it, but I don't get why you're looking at it that way. In other words, I guess I don't see what's wrong in the way that we're painting it or anything like that. But Michael, thank you for the call. Did you have any other comments here?
Yeah, it's like gas, like the gas industry or the AT&T. It started off with one company, and it's antitrust monopoly laws that the government tells AT&T you have to split up. That's when you get Sprint. That's when you get other companies. Same thing with the gas situation. It was like one company, I don't remember the name, maybe Sunoco or Exxon or whatever, and then they split into Chevron to all these other companies.
I know, but YouTube or the World Wide Web in this case wouldn't be the gas company. It would be just gas in the ground, if that makes sense. It's not the company. The company is something separate and distinct. It's kind of like the YouTube thing, meaning each company is a discrete unit of action. It's this kind of legal fiction in and of itself. The gas and the thing that they're trying to exploit would be, I guess, the equivalent of the World Wide Web, where anything could take action against that particular gas. I mean, gas is used for, pills and bags and everything else at this point. From the standpoint of the web, it's just a reality space. That's all it is, no more, no less. And people are congregating to that reality space. It would be like saying space is, a company. Well, space is not a company. It's just a vacuum, well, more or less, that people can go into and populate and put stuff in. It's no different.
Sounds good.
Michael, thank you for the call. There are a couple of things. I appreciate it, Michael. A couple of things you brought up there that are interesting to me. For one thing, Bell, the big major...
Bell Labs, AT&T.
Exactly. Bell Labs, AT&T came out of a major communications company. Of course, they were the subject of a major antitrust breakup that it's just an interesting history there. And I think what you were talking about, I believe, was Standard Oil.
Yeah.
If you're talking about a major gas company that was effectively a monopoly in the U.S., just to try to fill in the gaps of the call.
The rail used to be a monopoly at one point also. All of these, this gets to the trust buster. Teddy Roosevelt, where, these guys thought they were bigger than the presidency, and Roosevelt brings them to the office and basically browbeats them. It gets across, no, you're not. I guess the catch is, what do you do about it, though? Is it one of those things where you make it what is it called? Not an appliance. not even a service. What is the name of it?
Platform.
No, not a platform, like a industry, but it's utility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shout out to the engineer. Thank you. Yeah, a utility. Is that what you do? I mean, because otherwise, I'm not quite sure what you do about it. I mean, this is one of those things at this point where our ability to engage with one another is almost like it requires your ability to engage online. And so to have basically that faculty to be entirely controlled by companies and organizations and everything else, it seems like there needs to be something else around that beyond just the individual private enterprise, considering the power that these guys have in regards to communication.
You know, I was the one who used the metaphor of the world, though, when we were talking about, talking with Michael, the natural world versus the digital world, whatever. A major difference between the two is that unlike roads or plumbing or phone lines, physical utilities, it's infinite. And so theoretically, I don't have to use Twitter. I could use whatever, Twitter. I'm not going to use the other vowel. But you get my point. You can use that's the theory here, is that you don't need to fill in a space. You don't need to, it's not like as far as public goods go, I forget the exact term here, but it's sort of economic study of this stuff. It's a kind of public good that is not limited to space. It's not fixed in space. In other words, again, I don't need to use Twitter theoretically, but practically, this is a weird gray zone that I think that another way of looking at this, the conversations and the legal precedents that apply to utilities and to monopolies in the space of utilities wouldn't apply in a lot of ways to the digital space very simply because there are infinite options. Theoretically, I could immediately switch from one to the other, unlike switching from this road to that road. There's only going to be one road in one spot, ideally.
Kind of. I mean, well, maybe. I mean, if we're thinking about it in that same sense, I mean, it's a physical space, right? And there is a difference between the physical space and the virtual space in the sense that one is an infinite space. But in the same way where we're populating it with things in the physical space, it's still kind of the same issue where it's like, okay, those things are being populated in a digital space and you're limited on some level by what's populated there, if that makes sense.
Totally. I wanted to bring it back to the main thing here, which is, of course, just, rereading the headline here. We're going to be talking about this a lot more during the show this hour and next hour. In Germany, RT's German channels on YouTube were blocked by YouTube yesterday over claims that they were spreading COVID misinformation. Then today, early this morning, Russia responded saying they would block YouTube in Russia if YouTube didn't reverse this move. So that's like a major dispute, basically, that's going on. Just setting this up for people. Coming back to the sort of monopoly side of things, one way that actually breaks down is with this national siloization. I don't know if that's a word, but
I know what you mean.
The national splitting of, like
if each country had their own little service.
Yeah, all these different countries, most countries around the world, Facebook is a pretty popular app, but there are alternatives, specifically in Facebook and in Russia. In China and in Russia, and these two major competitors of ours. Why do they have their own alternatives? Probably because they're a competitor of ours, and they don't want to rely on us. Facebook is technically, it's a U.S. company, even though it's internationalized. It's completely a U.S. company run by Americans broadly. You get my point. So what does that lead to? With geopolitical competition comes this splitting. That's a kind of demonopolization around the world. But also, if you look at what Facebook's, coming back to Facebook, stepping away from Google for a second, Facebook's whole point is like bringing people around the world together. That's like one of their creeds. That's their big thing, is bringing people speak different languages and come from different communities, trying to tie those bonds. That's their sort of idealistic take on this. What happens to that when suddenly you can only use Facebook in the West? I think it completely undercuts it. And I think the same thing, the promise, like just the promise of an internet company, an app like this in general. What do you get out of that? What do you want from it? Partly it's that like infinite reach, communicating with anybody anywhere instantly, like zero downtime, that kind of thing. That like perfect dream is crumbling just based on the fact of geopolitical competition. It's a kind of way to break up monopoly, an interesting way to see it, I think.
And it's an unfortunate reality. I mean, at this point, there's something, I don't know, emancipatory about a situation where all of the people of the world are basically united under this kind of umbrella of communication, where, wherever you are, you could be in Timbuktu, in a village, in a hut somewhere. And yet, the moment that something happens on the other end of the world, it's right there at your fingertips. This capacity to be able to talk to, engage with, not just having to go through the kind of governmental edifice or even like the media and the way that the media would propagandize information about this country or that country, but to be able to go to the source and actually see people and talk to various people in those countries. It is a unifying thing on some level. And so for me, it's to the detriment of all of us on some level for that for that to get undermined because of political intrigue and this kind of political machinations of the groups. And look, it's unfortunate, but that's what it seems to be happening. I mean, and to their credit, Twitter and Facebook are American companies. I mean, these are companies that are basically going to look out for U.S. interests. And, there was this big kerfuffle once before where certain items where Russia was saying, look, you need to remove certain items because of what you're basically running is against our own laws. And they wouldn't do it. They wanted to just blow them off. Oh, we're an American company. We don't have to pay attention to you and all this other stuff.
Yep.
But that's not true in the United States. We follow all of their regulations and all of their rules and stuff like that. We're very stick-to-itive to the rule set. But that's not necessarily true. And that same respect is not necessarily given elsewhere. And so it's unfortunate, to put it mildly. I like this notion. And that was probably one of the better aspects of the internet, was this kind of pulling together all of these people in all of these parts of the world, disparate parts of the world. But yeah, you're right. It's almost like a balkanization of it where it's breaking down on some level based on this national tensions. Unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. It splits apart. And guess what? This is happening under COVID. This is happening due to COVID, specifically this move.
Yeah.
And I don't like whatever COVID misinformation. I don't like lies, simply. Yeah. But having said that, imagine for a second, like I've watched videos myself. People on the Chinese end of the spectrum, either living in China or who are nationally Chinese, who are like talking about the Fort Detrick theory, the idea, which I don't necessarily buy into for reasons that are kind of irrelevant to this conversation, but people talking about it. Imagine if their videos started getting not just shadow banned, but like China's state media on YouTube started getting blocked.
Yeah.
That would be a big move. I can see this kind of thing happening more often. It seems like an overreaction.
Yeah.
I'm going to take us into a brief break, though. We're going to be keeping this conversation going on the other side. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back in just a minute.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We're going to continue the conversation talking about YouTube basically taking down RT in Germany. And we have Mindia Gavashelli, am I pronouncing the last name correctly?
Yeah.
Good, excellent. He's our station manager, station chief. Explain to us what is taking place with this. As we were talking here, I was looking over all of the information, trying to figure out, okay, what's the specific claim? What's the specific thing that they supposed to had said that was wrong? It is nowhere to be found, not in our outlets or other people's outlets. This is somewhat deplorable. If you're going to take somebody's site down, you should at the very least give a heads up on what it is or what they did that was the offending content. It's not there at all. So what's going on so far in this situation? What's the latest on this?
The latest is that if nothing changes, it will be de facto the end of RT Germany, because RT Germany has never been issued a license to broadcast in Germany. As a result, what they had to do, they had to broadcast online, and YouTube was the main platform that they used for those broadcasts. Even though YouTube put them in the position where RT Germany videos were not promoted, they were not suggested, they were nowhere to be seen unless you specifically subscribe to it, unless you specifically go to that channel and look for new videos. So from the start, they were discriminated against. But even in all those awful circumstances, they managed to become the 5th most popular YouTube channel in Germany. And I bet you that if that wasn't the case, I mean, if there were no artificial limitations on how they work, that would have been the most popular YouTube channel in Germany. Just like RT used to be the most popular news channel on YouTube. But even that seemingly wasn't enough for a German establishment, B, for YouTube, which is in cahoots with it. Just yesterday, we were speaking about how YouTube blocked or promised to block any video that challenges the results of the German election specifically. Even though there were no major complaints from anywhere. No political party complained about results not being fair. No major politicians had any statements about elections being fraudulent or stolen or anything of that like that. YouTube preemptively came out and said, we will delete any videos that will even dare to challenge the results of the election.
Just out the blue.
Yeah, just out of the blue. And, you know, most people just shrug their shoulders because, like, well, whatever, no one's even disputed that. But it's a precedent when YouTube itself is the arbiter of the elections all around the world. Like we've seen it here in the United States when YouTube has an official policy of striking down any video that challenges the results of the election. And under that pretext, oftentimes what happens, and you alluded to it in your previous segment, they strike down channels that don't even do that.
They don't do it.
Like it was with By Any Means Necessary. I just spoke with Sean Blackman, the host of that show. It's still a mystery to us why the YouTube channel has been blocked.
And let's be clear, they don't delineate the video in question, or they don't delineate the issue per se. Meaning they don't give you the situation of saying, hey, this is the specific thing that we were bothered by. They would just give you this bland rule set of saying, this is harmful, disinformation, or something else. You need to figure out what it is and take down whatever videos that applies to it. But that's not the same thing as saying, this is our issue and this is the problem associated with this. I made a point before. This goes far beyond the notion of a platform. I mean, these guys are taking publisher choices and decisions in regards to what they show, and they're making determinations. They're making decisions about this stuff. I mean, from your standpoint, what do you think is going to basically end up with this? I mean, do you think they're going to back up on this? I mean, is this some level of a negotiation where there's have any communication with the channel, with YouTube, in order to try to, I guess, work this out? What is going on so far in regards to negotiations?
Well, this time around, YouTube vastly overestimated its powers. Because now it has a clear choice. And it already became a major international scandal. Russian Foreign Ministry issued a statement. Russian Parliament issued a statement. And it's not just empty threats. Now Russian regulators filed an official warning to YouTube and Google saying, either you immediately restore work of those channels, or we will block you in this country.
Mindia.
That's a clear choice that they have right now.
Mindia, we have him on. We have Ivan calling in. We have from head of online at RTDE.
Oh, excellent.
Germany.
Ivor, welcome.
Ivan, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Hey guys, I guess okay considering the circumstances. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So this is big news. This must be coming as a shock right now. What specifically caused this? Can you just start us off with, you know, what's the recent precedent? What led up to this? And then what excuse did YouTube give for taking this action?
Sure. I guess if we go all the way back, we've received strikes on the channel prior years, and it usually was that we would receive a strike, and the strike means that we couldn't upload videos, do live, and even post in the YouTube community. So naturally, it's a huge part of our traffic to the website. And what we did was we sometimes would go to other channels that are connected to, in a way, to German RT, like the Fälle the Part, for example, the missing part, and we'll publish some of the content there. So a week ago, on 21st, if I'm not mistaken, we received a strike for 4 videos, specifically for allegedly COVID misinformation. I can go more in detail with the videos, but we received it. There was no actually time to appeal because we had the Bundestag election. We had a lot of course, materials coming out. So what we did was we, again, put some of the new videos introduced to the politicians, etc., on their Fälle the Part, the Missing Part YouTube channel. And a week later, on the day that the ban should have been lifted, and we would have been able to publish again on our TV YouTube channel, we received with no prior messages or warnings that both channels are deleted for supposedly circumventing the restrictions that YouTube pointed out. So I guess that's that. And the only weird stuff, if I might say, is that some of the contributions that were, said that we've, against COVID rules of YouTube, specifically, they were several, if not 6-7 months old, and that led us to being scolded by YouTube just, again, shortly before the German federal election. So I guess that's the timeline.
That makes perfect sense. So again, some of these 6-7 months old, a lot of stuff that for some reason they've just now recently decided to mark. And then you were saying that you posted them to another channel like you do automatically. When I was seeing the reporting about this, in the West, I believe it was Politico that was painting this as, well, they tried to circumvent being able to post it on one channel by posting it on another channel. But from what you're saying, you just do that regardless, right?
We did that once when we were banned for a month. And actually, there was no repercussions, no problems that we known of. Actually, the YouTube policy says that, we were trying to go around it, but we were not publishing the same content. We were publishing something new. So I really can't go into much detail because we're still looking at the options or how to go and appeal to YouTube in this particular case. But you mentioned Politico, of course, which was bought by the German giant Axel Springer. And I think the day after they were bought by Axel Springer, they published an article saying that, oh, no, it's very dangerous that RTVE is gaining a lot of traction in social media and on YouTube particularly. And a lot of Germans are turning to RTVE. And after that, before, I think a couple of weeks before the election, we've had articles coming from Süddeutsche Zeitung, from Neue Zürcher Zeitung, from the major German outlets, specifically attacking and calling, not calling, but, talking about how dangerous it is that RTVE has a social media presence in Germany, and it's, successful in their view, not ours, mind you.
Ivan, I'm going to take us into a brief break here. We are joined by Ivan Klepov, head of online at RTDE, that's RT Germany. We're talking about YouTube in Germany taking down 2 channels, 2 of RT's channels, RTDE, RT Germany. We're also going to be talking when we come back, following up on that, but also talking about them basically preventing conversation about the legitimacy of the German election. We were talking about this yesterday. We were going to be hitting this story today anyway. Then this happened. A major step forward. Russia has said they would ban YouTube in Russia in response if they don't see a movement by YouTube to unban these channels. Again, we're joined by Ivan Klepov. We'll be back with him continuing this conversation on the other side of this short break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik. telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We continue to be joined by Ivan Klepov, head of online at RTDE, that's RT Germany. Ivan, thank you again for joining us again. I mentioned it before we went into our break. I want to come back to this. There's also this conversation outside of the big news, which is RT Germany being banned, 2 channels being banned over, from what you were saying, old videos, 6-7-month-old videos in some of these cases. There was also the case, we're going to be hitting this anyway, of in Germany, and just in general, YouTube stopping criticism, if I'm understanding this right, basically any criticism or questioning on YouTube of the legitimacy of the German elections. Are you familiar with this? What's the story there, Evan?
Well, actually, this is something that is reminiscent of how YouTube is now tackling for a long time the election of Donald Trump. So, as you know, we've actually had some but warnings from YouTube for showing the life of Donald Trump with German subtitles. And we've learned that YouTube said that, you can't show it without basically contradicting what Mr. Trump says with the official position that the election were completely legitimate, there was no problem. And we were like, okay, a bit weird, but sure, we can comply and add balance if, YouTube so much desires, but we will not try and hide anything that's being said because, this is a former president of the United States. And now just, I might be mistaken, but I think less than a week ago, the YouTube now says that the German election is specifically in the same category. So anyone who is saying that the elections were fake, that there were, fake bulletins, that someone rigged the election, would be banned or receive a strike on YouTube.
This is an extraordinary slippery slope. I mean, YouTube is basically acting as an editor almost in regards to what they show. I mean, like I made the point earlier about Ford Fisher. Ford Fisher did the video of what was taking place on January 6th. The only thing he did, took his camera, recorded what happened. And like I said, Congress even used that in the impeachment of Donald Trump, getting across the gravity of the video. If I'm not mistaken, media organizations even ran the video. Fisher got his channel stricken for that. I mean, despite the fact that it was just showing the reality of what was taking place. I also want to draw a circle around something else. These videos were 6 and 7 months old that they basically held on to up until the point of the German elections, and then coming out saying, hey, there's a problem with these specific videos. From what was the issue in those videos that they were claiming? Did they go into specifics about what was said in the video that was creating the crisis or the problem of regards to COVID disinformation?
Well, I do hope that there are people, creators on YouTube, who actually receive, a proper answer from YouTube, like specifying what was wrong with the video. But usually what YouTube does is just sends you a video and then a comment saying like, hey, this video contradicts the official WHO position on, say, masks or PCR tests or vaccines. And you're like, okay, but the conversation was relatively long. And I can go into detail kind of them. For example, one of the videos was from director of Bonn Institute of Immunology, who actually had COVID, almost died because of it, and is not in any way an anti-vaxxer or COVID denier. But he said in the interview that he thinks that bureaucrats make a lot of decisions not based on science. And for example, he thinks it's stupid that some of the people go outside with the masks on, and that he shouldn't be able to wear a mask when he's alone in the train, for example, sitting in his, say, first class coach.
And that was too far.
Same thing with the video, with the interview of former head of German health ministry in one of the regions, who was critical, who was, again, super pro-vaccine, but he said that, and that's the only thing that I can guess was YouTube's problem, because he said in the interview that he doesn't think that masks work because masks need to be utilized and used in a specific way, and the majority of the population in the world doesn't do that. You know, people wear masks for weeks, which in turn could be bad for their health. That's what he claimed. But again, not COVID denier, not anti-vaxxer in any shape or form. So it is kind of a slippery slope where we have to guess what YouTube thinks is bad and how to contradict it. And you're like, are we tackling here a discussion or COVID misinformation? So, you know, you have to decide for your own.
But from what you were just saying, it does not sound like disinformation. That sounds like a perfectly reasonable discussion. And I will pair this. Scott Gottlieb over in the United States, he was the 23rd commissioner of the FDA from 2017 till 2019 under Trump. He had said recently that basically this 6-foot social distancing policy was effectively arbitrary. He said, you know, it could have been 3 feet, it could have been 10 feet, 6 feet was basically an arbitrarily chosen number. Now, that was not banned. I saw that talked about all over the place here in the States. But technically, he's doing something very similar to what you were just describing.
That's right.
He's saying this is an arbitrary move by bureaucrats. It's not based on medical science. He's not saying it should end. He's not saying there should be no social distancing, just like, you know, the people that you were just mentioning. It's not like they're anti-vaxxers. It's not like they're completely opposed to this stuff. They're just questioning it.
It's a conversation.
It's a conversation, right. But there's this massive chilling effect where for you, for us, for anybody talking about this stuff online, and increasingly, whether you're a media professional, whether you're, you know, on YouTube with a lot of followers, or you're just some random dude talking about this stuff, you don't know what you're allowed to say. What's your take on that, Ivan?
To be honest, in a way, the YouTube says, guys, go with the WHO guidelines. And, like, we are, you know, an honest-to-God media organization. We don't want to break rules. You know, it's a platform, sure. But, for example, in WHO's case, the position on things like masks changed over the last couple of years, for example. And it's not just YouTube. Like we have on Facebook in Germany, I think every Facebook has their own fact-checkers who supposedly see what's wrong, what's not. In Germany, this is Corrective, who is on a mission to find any possible mistake in our texts. So not mistake, but actually like say that if we have a comment from someone critical to, say, lockdown or, you know, some side effects by the vaccines, or just, you know, not talking in general, but specifically turning attention to something that's not being discussed in the mainstream, they will always have a warning or patch us with a sign that says out of context, basically implying that what we say is not the full truth because we need to add. But then you have to ask a question like, how much information do we actually have to add? Do we have to add the whole page on from WHO? And if Robert Koch Institute, which is reminiscent of, I guess, FDA in the U.S.
You said Robert Koch Institute, right?
Robert Koch Institute, yeah. Like, if they have a little different position on something, should we include them as well? And then should we include the U.S. FDA or more maybe a comment from Mr. Fauci? It gets a bit bizarre when you don't know what do you have to add, how much do you have to add, and you're just trying to sort of figure out the best possible way to add this so-called balance to your thesis. I mean, this has been a crazy couple of years.
It's a magnificent slippery slope, to put it mildly. I mean, this is basically a ministry of truth, where YouTube or social media is making a determination about what's true and what's false. And in these situations, it also puts a chilling effect on any notion of having a conversation that's nuanced. Meaning, I tend to be probably one of the harder people on the show about vaccinations and COVID and everything else. But there's still conversations that are had where people may take a different position and aren't necessarily giving misinformation. It's just a different position.
And by hard, you mean pro.
Yeah, pro.
You mean not against. You mean in favor of them.
In favor of. In favor of the mask, in favor of the distancing, all of that stuff. I tend to be very strong on it. But we don't chill conversation in the way of having either the debate or back and forth in regards to having a talk. It seems like it undermines, it's a chilling effect on any notion of nuance within the conversations. From the standpoint, where are you guys going now? I mean, have you guys noticed has there been a concerted effort, let's say by Germany, to go after Russian media in general. And I know you didn't necessarily get the broadcasting license in Germany, so YouTube is one of the main platforms. What's the next step going from here? And are you concerned that basically German government is trying to basically squash any capability for RT to function in their country?
Well, we are moving forward, and we're not afraid, although the amount of attention we get from the government, from the German Journalist Union, from the mainstream media is, to be honest, getting a bit ridiculous. But there's just not going back. We will try to have the conversation. We will try to move forward. And to what you said before, actually, about conversation, in Germany, there's a pretty large movement of Querdenken, the lateral thinkers, the people who are critical of the COVID response by the government. You might have seen protests in Berlin, for example. They are, quite a vocal minority, to say the least. But the mainstream, sort of marginalized them in a way that, and turn the conversation around the topic that so you can't say anything critical, like you said, for example, about ask questions about masks, about vaccines, and the mainstream claims that RTD is the media that spreads conspiracy theories. But actually, I would argue that most people get their conspiracy theories because of the mainstream pushing down on the conversation and trying to say, like, no. There's only one decision, one way, and if WHO said that, and if DPA said that, if Fauci said that, that's like a law now. And of course, people would say, hey, you're trying to hide something. Well, not necessarily something big or something huge. And like the videos I described, it wasn't anti-COVID. But again, still the YouTube would say, no, you can't discuss that. And in my view, that even brings more conspiracy theories to life than what we do to actually trying to argue for a conversation.
This is a kind of question you might not be able to answer, but I'm curious. But between Germany, the country, and YouTube, the company, who would you say is more to blame here for this problem? I mean, I'm guessing YouTube, but you might only know what you've seen from the sort of error code, the response they gave you when they tried to explain very briefly and insufficiently their decision here. But in other words, would you see this more as political or corporate or a combination of the two? What's your take on that, Ivan?
The official position of the German government is that they have nothing to do with our bank accounts being closed, with the license from Luxembourg being denied, with the YouTube banning our channels. Of course, that's all we have to work with. But it was an interesting conundrum when Süddeutsche Zeitung, which is one of the most, the New York Times of German newspapers, and if I'm not wrong, a couple of others, but I forgot the names, wrote extensively about how German government is in talks with the Luxembourg and the members of the Ministry of Media, and the special forces even talked to Luxembourg and try to force them to not give license to RTD, but to specifically do this with Germany, where this is for administrative reasons is impossible. So they wrote extensively about it. There were comments that they're keeping an eye on us getting license. But when Angela Merkel came to Moscow and we were able to ask her a question on the topic and saying, like, hey, why do you think the government of Germany is, basically pressuring Luxembourg not to give us license? She replied that Luxembourg is a sovereign state. They don't have anyone pressuring it. So I guess that's all I have to say, and you have to decide on your own.
That sounds like a cup game or something like that. No, it's not our fault, it's their fault. And then you go to them. It's not our fault, it's their fault. It's right back and forth. Ivan, thank you for joining us, especially on short notice like this. Really appreciate it. Good talking with you this morning, Ivan.
No problem, fellas. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining. That was Ivan Klepov, head of online at RTDE. That's RT Germany. We were talking again about YouTube taking down 2 RT channels in Germany. You just heard it. Crazy stuff. Also talking about YouTube basically blocking any conversation any criticism of the election, there wasn't even that much going on.
No.
But there were these preemptive, suppressive steps. We're going to be coming back in a minute with headlines and the last hour of this morning's show. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, we're going back into headlines. It's September 29th, just past 9 a.m. Eastern. I hope you're all having a great morning. Let's go into COVID stats. First up, yesterday in the United States, there were 104,903 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,178 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 115,000 cases per day. That's a decrease of 26% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 56% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, up from 55% yesterday, and 64% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 43,205,257 people across the United States. It has killed 692,737 people. I'll be coming back to this in a minute, but I'm seeing it come through in Washington Post right now that YouTube is blocking all anti-vaccine content and banning prominent anti-vaccine activists. Pertains directly to the conversation we were just having. We'll talk about it more in a couple of minutes, but that's breaking right now. Continuing with our headlines, between 2019 and 2021, prescriptions for ivermectin have risen more than 70%. The greatest increases were seen in Idaho, New Mexico, and Wyoming, where the prescriptions increased by 258%, 216%, and 204%, respectively. In national news, during testimony yesterday from top generals speaking before the Senate Armed Services Committee, military officials contradicted claims by Biden that it had not been recommended to him to keep troops on the ground in Afghanistan. We've played a couple of clips from that hearing this morning, and we'll be playing them a little bit more when we speak with Caleb Maupin. But suffice it to say, this is a controversial piece of news yesterday. We were talking about this earlier, just the two of us. And again, we'll be talking about it again in a couple with Caleb Maupin. Yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security denied landing rights for a charter plane carrying more than 100 Americans and U.S. green card holders evacuating from Afghanistan. The plane carried 28 Americans, 83 green card holders, and 6 people with U.S. special immigration visas. The White House is touting success in their vaccination attempts. The publicized findings show near identical vaccination rates across ethnic groups. A report by the Kaiser Family Foundation says 71% of white, 70% of African American, and 73% of Latinos have gotten vaccinated. Chief Pandemic Response Coordinator Jeff Zientis said, quote, "We know our work isn't done, but this is important progress," end quote. They're just focusing on the ethnic parity, which is interesting and good to know and actually a bit surprising to me. But the overall vaccination rate has been stagnant for a while now. Technically, it just literally raised a little bit this morning.
1%.
By 1%.
Yeah.
But this has been after, like, it was going up quite a bit more quickly for a while there, months and months and months ago, and then it started to slow down. And now we're at the flat part of the curve. Mm-hmm. And this proclamation doesn't change that one bit. Starting Friday, the Postal Service will, quote, implement new service standards for first-class mail and periodicals, end quote. The changes mean an increase in transit time for long-distance mail. Most first-class mail will not be slowed, but the USPS has suffered detrimental employment numbers since the start of the pandemic. Companies all over the country are laying off their employees as the deadline for worker vaccination ends. A North Carolina hospital system suspended 375 employees. United Airlines has laid off around 600 employees, and hospitals all over New York are placing people on unpaid leave. 220 from Presbyterian Hospital, about 400 from Erie County Medical Center, and more to come, as an approximate 8,000 medical workers in New York City are unvaccinated. In international news, yesterday YouTube blocked RT's German accounts over claims of coronavirus misinformation. If you were listening to our conversation just now with Ivan Klepov, head of online at RT Germany, you will hear that's pretty ridiculous. If based on what he was telling us, not misinformation. It's not people saying they're pro-vaccine, they're pro-mask, they're broadly in favor of this stuff. But the videos that apparently YouTube was targeting were like they were criticizing the way that bureaucrats have handled this pandemic, which frankly everybody should be, because they've bungled it broadly across the board. Anyway, Russia, in response to this move, has threatened to block YouTube in the country if it didn't restore the banned channels. RT's editor-in-chief called the ban a, quote, real media war declared by the state of Germany to the state of Russia, end quote. Following Joe Biden's refusal to meet with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan during the UN General Assembly, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Erdogan are meeting in Sochi, Russia this morning. This also follows comments by Erdogan that Turkey would buy a second batch of the S-400 missile defense system. Immediately after that comment was made, the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations warned that new purchases by Turkey would mean new sanctions under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, that's CAATSA, designed to deter, quote-unquote, adversaries from hostile actions. North Korea, meanwhile, has claimed that it successfully tested a new hypersonic missile called Hwasong-8. It claimed the missile was a strategic weapon, quote-unquote, which usually means it has nuclear capabilities. And in holiday news, following on the second day of holiday news, today is National Coffee Day. Many prominent chains are giving freebies to celebrate it. Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, Wawa, Krispy Kreme, many others are participating. So if you drink the stuff, stop in at your local coffee shop for free donuts or coffee today only. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So I wonder if this was premeditated, Jamarl. Yesterday, it's National Drink a Beer Day. And I'm guessing that people drinking a beer probably don't stop at one. They get a little bit tired. You wake up today, you're not feeling quite up to it.
And then a bump of coffee.
Then you get free coffee. Yeah. Exactly. It's like orchestrated by the drink companies or whatever.
That's funny. Yeah,
anyway.
That's funny. Yeah.
We've got a lot else to talk about, too. I just wanted to note that. Great conversation. Really glad we were able to get Ivan. There's a lot going on over there, as people can imagine.
Yeah.
And so first we were talking to one agency, then we were talking to another, trying to get people on. It's just they're as you can imagine, major upset for them.
International incident at this point.
It is.
I mean, especially if you're the Russian government and you look out and you think, okay, YouTube is not taking this decision on their own. They're taking this decision because they're either being pushed or they're being, let's say, cajoled into a particular choice. Well, at that point, you almost have to get involved if you want some kind of support for your network. I mean, it's basically one government pushing to take action against another government's news source and vice versa. I mean, and the catch becomes Russia allows Western sources in its own country for media. And so, yeah, it's this kind of weird bias in the way that they're operating. And so, no, I can't blame Russia at all for basically taking that action of saying, look, either you bring these back on or we're going to get rid of basically YouTube in our country. We're not going to have this kind of one-way unilateral action against the news source. I mean, I don't blame them at all.
Yeah, no, it's a big and, in my opinion, completely justified move.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. And interestingly enough, you know what? Our YouTube channel, literally the Fault Lines one, it could be a complete coincidence, but it's skipping right now. We'll see. I don't know if this is a breaking story. It could just be something going on with YouTube. You know what I mean?
That's funny.
But, and like I was saying, breaking headline here that I didn't get to in our formal headline segment because I'd just seen it coming through from Washington Post. But again, YouTube now moving to block all anti-vaccine content and prominent anti-vax activists.
I guess the question becomes, what do they mean by anti-vaccine comment? Because apparently, based on the conversation we just had, it doesn't sound like the person who we were talking to was pushing anti-vaccine commentary. In fact, it sounds like they were having conversations around it, and YouTube was looking at even conversations about it as being anti-vaccine content. Like, it's one thing if somebody comes on and they're like, like Tucker Carlson and the arguments that he would make, where he would bring on like Naomi Wolf and they would have this kind of weird conversation about vaccines. Or if somebody's making this case of, yeah, the vaccines are hurting people, are killing people, and et cetera, and you can show that there is a certain level of people who are getting injured by the commentary. It's almost like screaming fire in a movie theater, or something like that, where you can at the very least make some allegory. Like, okay, I kind of get where they're coming from with that. This is not that. This is something else. We're having conversations about something that the guy said in the beginning about masks, or we're having conversations about, okay, hey, this policy goes too far. And that in and of itself becomes off the reservation in regards to any level of topic and any level of discourse. And yeah, I do think there's something to say about like even having the conversation when the conversation is not even allowed. I mean, even like getting close to a conversation about that stuff is not even allowed, that it makes it look as if, okay, these guys are preventing us from having a talk. These guys are trying to give this kind of propaganda about X or Y, meaning it hurts your case. It doesn't make your case better. I mean, the question becomes whether or not the information either hardens a person's position or changes a person's position. And I got to be honest, I'm not quite sure exactly which one it is. It may be a little bit of both, but I'm more inclined to believe it probably hardens the position, not changes it. But either way, there's a demarcation point between various conversations that we would have on this show, for example, and people calling in on the show. So what are they going to do? Shut down fault lines because people will call in on the show and we argue back and forth about the various elements of either vaccinations or masks or social distancing or policy.
It's possible. Yeah. I'm talking with Austin right now who's saying, and I quote, "We possibly just got banned on YouTube. Our stream went down and it's not coming back." And guess what? I guess, are we going to have to converse now? Egg-pay, Attenlay? Are we going to have to throw in some codes here to actually have conversations? Or are they just going to keep trying to suppress all conversation? We're literally wearing masks in the studio, Jamarl.
Masks in studio.
Compared to these freaking high lifes, these socialite celebrity politicians who are out there clubbing it up with each other.
And there's been nobody
half a foot away from each other, no masks.
More vigilant on the whole COVID thing than this channel. Yep. I mean, we go in the death rates every day. We go on the amount of people who've been injured, sick.
We're back up. Okay. Yeah. It was a false alarm.
Okay, fair enough.
But very well timed false alarm.
Hyperbolic.
It was about to get really exciting.
But it is aggravating. I mean, like, look, I am not one of those people who think it's great for people to put out misinformation about the vaccinations, like Weinstein, whatever his name is. And there's plenty of people who are anti-vaxxers and stuff that push that stuff out, that are doing so to the detriment of the population, to the people who are listening to them and everything else. But that's not this. And there needs to be a distinction between those things where it's like, okay, this is legitimate discourse in regards to what is taking place here. And these guys are just basically grifting and getting people killed.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like they have the capacity to split those two things. And especially now with the German government seeming to be out for blood, they're looking for any and everything possible to find a justification and reason to get rid of them.
But you know
That's
what?
so bogus.
You know what's happening? Austin's saying we've never had this error before.
Yeah.
And again, breaking news about 10 minutes ago that I was saying, they're planning on banning all anti-vaccine accounts and videos and stuff. We're like extremely far from anti-vaccine.
Yes.
In terms of the whole conversation here, we regularly speak, every medical professional that we speak to is like pro-vaccine. We're asking them questions, kind of encouraging it, et cetera. Our comment section is, Austin's saying not our comment section, maybe, but what the hell, dude? Am I supposed to ban anybody who says something that YouTube doesn't want them to say? No.
And is the comment section really what they're looking for in order to kind of go after channels? I mean, look, they could do that, right? I mean, YouTube can do whatever they want for their YouTube could say, from here on out, you also have to manicure your comment section. It's not just the videos themselves. And for the January 6th thing, where that's one of the arguments they made too. They was like, well, you need to have something that competes against what Donald Trump was saying. It's like, dude, I just took a video of what was happening on the ground. I'm not a reporter in the sense of going on and giving commentary. I'm just showing you this is what literally took place in physical matter reality on this day. And it's like, yeah, that's too much reality.
Yes,
we can't have you do that.
This was the Sidney Powell clip, right?
No, this wasn't the well, Sidney Powell one was one where they dinged me for, but I'm talking about Ford Fisher's.
Oh yes,
January 6th
literally that one.
But the only thing he did was, I am recording what took place.
I'm recording the events here, and then the establishment uses it. Literally played in the halls of Congress
in mainstream media.
Yes,
mainstream media could play it, and no, they didn't shut down the mainstream media sites who played the content on YouTube. They just shut down the independent people who were doing it. They eventually brought his channel up, but it's somewhat of a moot point. This whole Section 230 thing where they're supposed to be platforms, not editors. And I swear it gets closer and closer. Not just closer, they're smack dab in the middle of this notion of being an editor. They're making editorial decisions. These things are not decisions of a platform. And the notion that they are clear in their rule set is nonsense.
Yes.
Complete and utter nonsense.
Well, you know what? It's probably just a matter of time. I'm sad to say, but you know what that means? We just got to start preparing other options. We got to get in other places too. That's how that works. Life springs eternal. I don't know how else to say it. And I guess We've been talking about this a bunch, but because of that, I want to take us into a break. We're going to be rejoined by Caleb Maupin. Changing subjects a bit, we're going to be talking about the UN General Assembly closing out, also revisiting yesterday's testimony by top generals contradicting Biden, who'd said nobody had advised him to keep troops on the ground in Afghanistan. That would seem on its face a little bit of a lie. A little bit of a lie, as Jamarl said. And again, in so many words, they contradicted him yesterday. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back, we will be speaking with Caleb Maupin. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So yesterday, we had conversation by the basically Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was being questioned by the Republicans and by Democrats also, but basically, we knew that it was going to be Republicans that were going to be more scathing on this stuff, especially towards General Milley. Let's go to the first video on this. This is Tom Cotton, and this has to do with whether or not Biden was advised to keep 2,500 troops behind in Afghanistan by the military leaders. Now, Biden basically said nobody told him that. But again, Biden has said multiple things that weren't true in relation to Afghanistan. But Tom Cotton, with some pretty incisive questions here, gets the generals to tell the truth. Let's play the clip.
General Milley, it's your testimony that you recommended 2,500 troops approximately stay in Afghanistan?
As I've said many times before this committee and other committees, I don't share my personal recommendations to the president, but I can tell you my personal opinion and my assessment if that's what you want.
Yes, please.
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution.
Did you ever present that assessment personally to President Biden?
I don't discuss exactly what my conversations are with the sitting president in the Oval Office, but I can tell you what my personal opinion was, and I'm always candid.
General McKenzie, do you share that assessment?
Senator, I do share that assessment.
Did you ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
Again, I'm not going to be able to comment on those executive discussions.
Did General Miller ever present that opinion personally to President Biden?
I think it would be best to ask him. I believe that his opinion was well heard.
Secretary Austin, President Biden last month in an interview with George Stephanopoulos said that no military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence in Afghanistan. Is that true?
Senator Cotton, I believe that, well, first of all, I know the president to be an honest and forthright man. And secondly,
it's a simple question, Secretary Austin. He said no senior military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence behind. Is that true or not? Did these officer and General Miller's recommendations get to the president personally?
Their input was received by the president and considered by the president for sure. In terms of what they specifically recommended, Senator, as they just said, they're not going to provide what they recommended in confidence.
I mean, it sounds to me, it's shocking to me. It sounds to me like maybe their best military advice was never presented personally to the President of the United States about such a highly consequential matter.
Secretary of Defense Austin doing his best to back up Joe Biden on this, but not necessarily succeeding in doing so. To have a conversation about the testimony yesterday, we're joined with Caleb Maupin. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Caleb, thank you for joining us.
Sure. Glad to be here.
So what was your take on the testimony? I mean, it sounds like Joe Biden basically was not being honest about, well, several things in regards to the Afghanistan policy, in regards to the pullout, especially from the standpoint of what was taking place on the ground. It just didn't seem like he was engaged or was fully, I guess, aware of the items that was going on the ground, even though he definitely had the clear policy of wanting to get out. How did you view the policy from yesterday, or I want to say interrogation, but it's not really an interrogation. I guess it's basically just the testimony by the military brass.
Well, I think we need to look over the fact that since the end of the Second World War, there has been a big conflict between the military-industrial complex and the civilian government of the United States. If you can read the book Generals Over the White House by Sam Marcy that discusses this. You can also read The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. And they go into great depth showing that the military and the elected government of the United States are often at odds. And the military-industrial complex has its own agenda, and that often comes into conflict with the elected government. And, you know, the whole situation with Milley and what was, you know, allegedly went on prior to Trump leaving office. Now we have, you know, various voices around the world saying that they believe that the reason this chaotic pullout of Afghanistan has gone the way it did is because, you know, because of the fact that Biden may have not been given proper information about it, and he may have been misled and given bad intelligence for the purpose of trying to you know, make the whole thing go badly and kind of ruin the Biden administration's reputation. And
wait, why do you think they might have did it on purpose? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that there's commentary that basically the military was trying to put a knife in Biden by making him look bad for pulling out.
Well, yeah, and that was Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela. He came forward and said, based on his information and the intelligence that he has as the president of Venezuela, that's what happened, and that they feel that that Biden, you know, made the decision to pull out, and the military-industrial complex didn't particularly like it, and so because of that, they made a point of making sure the pullout went as badly as possible to damage Biden's reputation. And to also put into the mind of the U.S. public, this is what happens when America pulls out. Oh, you know, when we pull out of countries, it's a disaster. See, this is what happens when we don't intervene, to push an interventionist narrative, and to kind of sabotage the pullout so that it would be done very, very badly, and it would have repercussions that would hurt the administration. So, you know, I would argue that this is kind of a fight that has been ongoing. The military-industrial complex is such a big part of the U.S. economy and has been since the end of the Second World War. We've restructured our economy, much like the way Hjalmar Schacht, the Nazi economist, restructured the German economy to be centered around military production. And as a result, it's almost like, you know, Dr. Frankenstein creating a monster and that he can't control. And in some ways, the power in the United States and the more strategic centers of U.S. power, and you know what you can call the Eastern establishment, the wealthier families, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts. You know, now we have Silicon Valley. They may have a different agenda, and they certainly want to operate in the world a little bit differently than what are the direct needs of the military-industrial complex. And this contradiction and this distance between factions and their short-term economic desires has kind of defined U.S. politics. I would argue that, you know, the reason that Kennedy was so widely hated in some sectors was because he was at odds with the military-industrial complex. You can argue that, you know, Jimmy Carter was basically fired by the military-industrial complex. He cut the military budget because he thought that was strategic, and the Reagan Revolution was largely the defense contractors and those folks kind of revolting against Jimmy Carter and his more soft power strategies. So there are different strategies on how to dominate the world. The military-industrial complex needs money, and there are divisions.
We've had over 60 years at this point to learn the lesson from Eisenhower's farewell address, January 17th, 1961, when he notably, of course, warned about the rise of the military-industrial complex. And I buy the argument generally, but when it comes to this specific case, I would attribute blame to both sides of it. And I think that the tendency right now, even in the Cotton clip that we were just playing, Republicans want to hammer Biden. Republicans want to go after Biden. But the Pentagon, CENTCOM, the failures of the generals who were being taken to task in different ways yesterday, those should be on the top of a lot of people's minds too. It's both of them. And I've even heard, we were going back and forth on this in late August before we took a break there, talking about this. I was making the point then, I could totally see that happening. Basically what you're saying from Maduro, that the generals were effectively holding it back. They wanted Biden to fail, either to justify ongoing intervention in the region and or to make it seem like an absolute catastrophic failure to warn against pulling out in the future. But on the other hand, and this is where I come back, wouldn't we hope that Biden, seeing that kind of thing as a possibility, would take decisive action to preempt that from happening? In other words, Trump was planning a staged withdrawal. Biden maybe thought he had the backing of the system or something like that. But shouldn't Biden have been a little bit more hands-on in this process, planning out exactly what this is, how this whole thing's going to go in the year leading up to this, the time that he has in office? Shouldn't he have done that? Caleb?
Yeah, you would think that Biden has the experience of being vice president for 8 years, being in the U.S. Senate for so long, that he would expect there to be such divisions and plan ahead for such things. But, you look at some of the attacks on General Milley, they accuse him of being the woke general. Seen these attacks where they say he's trying to bring critical race theory into the military, that he's trying to make the military more LGBT inclusive. And it seems like among the military itself, there is a feeling that kind of the more liberal politics that you get from the CIA and you get from, the Council on Foreign Relations and CNN and Silicon Valley, that the military itself doesn't seem to appreciate that, and that among the military brass, there is more of a traditional conservative viewpoint, and that they see General Milley as kind of an ally of the White House trying to impose a liberal agenda on them. And that is very interesting. That is very, very interesting.
Wait, how do you disambiguate? Well, I guess there are two questions. Why would Nicolas Maduro have information in regards to U.S. foreign policy, especially conversations or items that are taking place within the U.S. military? But on the second front, how do you disambiguate Republicans trying to go after Joe Biden on this particular issue, basically trying to find anything to go after Biden on, or for that matter, Milley, as opposed to military doctrine? Meaning, how do you know it's the military that may be more conservative and dislikes any kind of, I guess, this kind of liberal, potentially liberal agenda of the various factions, as opposed to Congress? I hope the question makes sense. The last one makes sense.
As far as Maduro, he was speaking to intelligence that he had received. Venezuela and the United States are at odds with each other. Venezuela is a country that is constantly trying to maneuver around U.S. attacks and attempted coups, and so I assume they pay a great deal of attention to, to what goes on and gathering information about what happens within the U.S. government apparatus. So if they perceive that, that's probably based on intelligence that they have gathered. He, as the president of Venezuela, was speaking to what he had received, and that was what Nicolas Maduro said, was that it appeared Biden had been deceived by the military and by the intelligence apparatus. Now, as far as the other question, though, it is quite interesting because many of the Pentagon brass are evangelical Christians and are more Mike Pence in their worldview. And yet, Milley, who has been the target of these Republican attacks and is being viewed as having betrayed Trump and gone talked to China, behind Trump's back, et cetera, he is being accused of being, too liberal. And that is one of the attacks we're seeing on him from Republicans and from voices associated with the military. And it's this allegation that somehow, he is trying to bring woke liberal politics into the military on behalf of Biden, on behalf of Silicon Valley and others, and that he's kind of a traitor to the more traditional conservative views that you find among a lot of folks in the Pentagon. And that is very interesting to me because, you ask questions there. There are people who have raised the issue of, the Pentagon strategist William S. Lind, and he wrote, the concept of fourth generation warfare is one of his main concepts, and he wrote a lot about U.S. strategy in Iraq and such. And he's tied to many kind of far right wing organizations that are traditionalist and conservative and have different views. So it appears there's kind of a culture war going on within the U.S. military itself. That as the USA becomes more and more quote unquote woke in our times, there's many in the military brass that don't particularly want that. And then that raises the question, how can you be woke and be the U.S. military, right? I mean, this is the military of the United States that, that seized, Mexico and so many wars. And I mean, the U.S. military, I mean, if you're going to adopt a Howard Zinn narrative of U.S. history, the U.S. military kind of finds itself in a pretty big identity crisis very quickly.
Caleb, I'm going to take us into a brief break. When we come back, I want to talk about the UN General Assembly, which you have been attending for over a week now, I believe. I've seen you constantly there. You were also in the room speaking with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Heard you get a question in. I want to hear from you the deets. We're joined by Caleb Maupin for this segment and the next. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. Follow him on Twitter at Caleb Maupin. Read his articles at calebmaupin.com, and that's CALEB. MAUPIN, calebmaupin.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with Caleb on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We continue to be joined by Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. Check him out on his website, calebmaupin.com. Also follow him on Twitter at Caleb Maupin. Caleb, I just want to set us up briefly here. UN General Assembly closing. Can you just give us, in a broad sense, what were you paying attention to? What were the highlights? How significant do you think this event was? And what did you take away from it, Caleb?
Well, the biggest thing that happened this year by far, I would say the most notable event, was when the French president canceled his speech to the UN General Assembly in the aftermath of Joe Biden's remarks. That was big. Joe Biden spoke to the UN General Assembly. Macron was scheduled to have a pre-recorded message shown afterwards. And after Joe Biden's speech, Macron changed his mind. And we didn't hear from France until the foreign minister took the floor on Monday. And we didn't hear from the French president. It was the first time the president of France has not addressed the UN General Assembly since 2005. And that was big. That was very, very big. And that indicates that this AUKUS deal, the anger about submarines, but more than that, kind of a lack of consensus about escalating with China among the NATO countries, the EU having political distance from the United States and Britain, that indicates there is division among the camp of Western capitalism more than ever. And that was big. I didn't see that coming at all. I will say the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, gave a very good address about, calling out this notion of the rules-based order. And, it's not clear what the rules are. They're not fairly applied. And I had the opportunity to directly engage with the Russian foreign minister at the press conference before his remarks to the UN General Assembly. So, it was an interesting UNGA. We heard from various countries that gave their address. It was not all done remotely. They had the option of doing it from the hall, as Biden did and other leaders did, or doing it remotely. And you know, I guess many were expecting there would be more profound remarks. I mean, there was a lot of platitudes. There's always a lot of platitudes, but people were expecting that there would be a little more addressing of current crises. It was kind of a UNGA where people tried to avoid directly stating the problems that were there. But when France canceled their speech, when the president of France canceled his speech, that was big. That was a big moment. That showed you that there is definitely something rotten in the state of Denmark. There's trouble in paradise, as they say.
Yeah, that the AUKUS deal, basically. I'm curious, with Angela Merkel leaving, I mean, she's basically the face of Europe, or has been the face of Europe for 16 years or so. She's leaving, which means that France is probably going to try to take some level, I guess, of a centerpiece in Europe, particularly with Macron. If they are responding this way to the AUKUS deal, does that dig further? Meaning, what does it mean for any kind of relationship between the United States and Europe? And is a widening gulf between the two organizations at this point that's indicative of Macron's actions, and for that matter, the ire that France has been putting out over this deal?
Well, the thing is, on the surface, this seems to just be about submarines, right? France is angry that they lost a $65 billion submarine contract. But it's about really more than that. And what nobody really wants to say is it's not just submarines. It's about the fact that France and Germany and Belgium and much of the European mainland doesn't want to escalate with China the same way Britain and the United States do. That they are not thrilled about the idea of a new Cold War, and they don't really want to escalate as much as the United States does. There is a geopolitical difference there. And the fact that Britain is no longer part of the European Union pushes the European Union further away from Britain and the United States. And the European mainland has long been at odds with the United States and Britain in terms of interests. One of the main differences is nuclear power. Germany and France, they love nuclear power. Britain and the United States, not so much, right? Britain and the United States are all about the global oil market, but France is all about nuclear power. And that difference has been long-standing, so much so that at one point, a major ally of the United States, Israel, bombed nuclear power facilities in Iraq and killed a French citizen who was working at them. France provided its own nuclear scientists to help Saddam Hussein get nuclear power, and Israel killed one of them when it bombed Iraq's nuclear power facilities during the 1980s. And the European mainland doesn't particularly appreciate, being dependent on oil and having, the oil markets dominated by the British and American companies. And you can go through the history. I mean, the European mainland and what you can call the Anglosphere of the United States and Britain, or, what some might call the Atlanticist powers, the United States and Britain, they have different interests. And they have a different pattern of development. They have different histories. And that contradiction really gave birth to the First World War. And then it was problems, that resulted from the First World War that ultimately gave birth to a lot of the problems and the confusion and the economic crisis that laid the basis for fascism and then the Second World War. And that this tension between the European mainland and the Anglosphere, it remains. There are differences there. We saw this around the Nord Stream 2 issue and the fact that the United States was furious that Germany would dare buy its natural gas from Russia rather than importing it all the way from the United States. There are differences here. And I think the global crisis, economically speaking, the pandemic has exacerbated those differences.
Well, that's a pretty good point, actually. I mean, the fact that it's being exacerbating those differences. Is this an in for China on this? I mean, or for that matter, what about Australia? I mean, Australia in this particular situation, China is one of their major trading partners. I mean, even though Europe, I think I agree with you that it seems that there is a division between Europe and the United States. I even agree with the notion that the UK, on some level, was willing, or being part of the European Union was a factor that kind of pulled Europe closer to the United States, and with Britain gone, that basically you have something that's further away. But from a military capacity, meaning whether we're talking about NATO or whether we're talking about Europe trying to form its own military or talking about its own foreign policy, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, how deep does this dig? I mean, is this a situation where Europe is trying to go their own way in regards to military policy, or are they stuck with us? Either way, meaning they can bellyache all they want. At the end of the day, they're still under the thumb of the U.S. in regards to geopolitical strategy?
Well, Germany definitely is. I mean, there's U.S. military bases all over Germany. For Germany to try and go its own way would require a lot of really big changes. France, though, has more of an ability to be independent. We remember during the Iraq War, the Freedom Fries debacle and how Jacques Chirac was opposing the U.S. invasion of Iraq and was demonized. We also remember that, it seemed like France was doing everything they could to fight against the Bush administration. Michael Moore got the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival and an 8-hour standing ovation for Fahrenheit 9/11. And it seemed like France was just completely throwing down against the Bush administration and the neocons during the Bush years. Then we saw Barack Obama, when he was campaigning for president, not only did he campaign throughout the United States, but he flew to Berlin and spoke to thousands of people in Berlin. And it was pretty clear the Obama administration was trying to repair relations with France and Germany and with the European mainland. But now what's odd is, so Trump, being a Republican, being a conservative, pushing his America First agenda, he, was telling Europe, that he didn't quite care about them, was trying to make NATO countries pay more for military hardware, et cetera. But you'd think now that Biden is in, things would get better. You'd think, well, Biden, he's trying to undo the damage of Trump. He's a Democrat. He's like Obama. He's going to try to repair things, make France like us more. But Biden's in there, and we see that the differences with France are more intense now than they were during the Trump years. It seems like the United States and France are getting along less than they were when Trump was president. It seems like a lot of what Trump started in terms of foreign policy is still going. Trump shifted to focusing on China as the main, opponent of U.S. power around the world. Focusing on China. That was the Trump administration. Biden is continuing that. Trump seems to have, started, being a little more hostile to the NATO countries, not as friendly. Now that Biden seems to be continuing that. It makes me wonder how much of a difference there really is at the end of the day. It seems like a lot of these foreign policy moves, Trump started them, but Biden is really continuing them.
Absolutely true. It's something we were talking about just the other day, and it's interesting to note that with the completely bungled withdrawal from Afghanistan, Biden embarrassed himself more than Trump ever did just with his rhetoric. Biden factually failed to get us out of there. And I get what you were bringing to the conversation earlier, basically the idea that they would have been holding us in, that the top brass, not the rank and file necessarily, but the top brass necessarily, would be trying to do whatever they could to prolong American involvement in Afghanistan, that Biden was pushing against that. That's sort of another conversation, but coming back to the point, this is a continuation of the decline from Trump that everybody was hoping, at least in the international community, everybody was hoping that Biden would put an end to that. It just seems to have escalated it. With Ursula von der Leyen saying that she would, that the European Union would basically be seeking and attaining military independence, at least partially, to intervene in other countries without U.S. approval. Basically, they can do what they want without our say-so about it. That would be a big step away. Do you see that as mostly posturing? If Europe is effectively fractured, if Germany is without Merkel and Europe is without its big heavyweight there, how do you see that, Caleb?
Again, the European Union doesn't seem as excited about, fighting with China or fighting with Russia as Britain and the United States are. And so if they're establishing their military independence and saying, we're going to have our own military and we're going to do things our own way, that kind of weakens the U.S. position in the geopolitical games. I think at the end of the day, that's what we're going to see. I mean, the United States isn't going to be able to mobilize the entire Western world around its latest military adventures as it did in Iraq and Libya and Afghanistan and elsewhere. We're going to see Europe having more independence in a military sense.
Caleb, I want to go back to one of the clips from yesterday that we didn't get a chance to play, and I want to get your take on it. You remember Milley got into a bit of hot water when Bob Woodruff revealed that he had communications with China, basically his counterparts in China, in order to bring down hostilities. Apparently, he saw reports that China wasn't sure how to take Donald Trump's actions, that the provocation, they didn't necessarily know where Trump was going with this, and there was concern in China on what seemed to be an unraveling of the United States, especially around January 6th. And so he contacts the person in China, basically giving a heads up that, look, we will make contact if anything goes on, meaning I'll give you a heads up, bring down the hostility. There was also the secondary conversation where the Joint Chiefs together, basically looking at each other saying, look, the president is not going to be able to make this choice alone from the standpoint of nuclear weapons. I think it was something about Nancy Pelosi eventually called. But basically, each one looking around the room, being on the same page of having, let's say, an interest or of an influence in the president's choices on any kind of strike. Let's play this clip for the moment.
That's a heavy lift. There's a lot to do and a lot to talk about, but everybody has to...
Wait, that's not the right one. It's the one with Milley for the moment, and we'll come back to it. I
attended a meeting with Acting Secretary Miller where I briefed him on the call. Later that same day, on 8 January, Speaker of the House Pelosi called me to inquire about the president's ability to launch nuclear weapons. I sought to assure her that nuclear launch is governed by a very specific and deliberate process. She was concerned and made various personal references characterizing the president. I explained to her that the president is the sole nuclear launch authority and he doesn't launch them alone, and that I am not qualified to determine the mental health of the President of the United States. There are processes, protocols, and procedures in place, and I repeatedly assured her that there is no chance of an illegal, unauthorized, or accidental launch. By presidential directive and Secretary of Defense directives, the chairman is part of the process to ensure the president is fully informed when determining the use of the world's deadliest weapons. By law, I am not in the chain of command, and I know that. However, by presidential directive and DOD instruction, I am in the chain of communication to fulfill my legal statutory role as the president's primary military advisor. After the Speaker Pelosi called, I convened a short meeting in my office with key members of my staff to refresh all of us on the procedures which we practice daily at the action officer level. Additionally, I immediately informed Acting Secretary of Defense Miller of Speaker Pelosi's phone call. At no time was I attempting to change or influence the process, usurp authority, or insert myself in the chain of command.
Hey, look, is that acceptable? I mean, we've had some people use the term treason. I think treason might be a little bit strong. But is this appropriate for Milley, in this case, to take those actions?
Well, again, I think it goes back to looking at who's really in charge. Is the military above the president? In theory and on paper, no. But as we've seen since the end of the Second World War, over the course of a series of presidencies, it's not exactly clear. There seem to be many cases where the Pentagon is able to maneuver against the president, where the Pentagon is able to almost remove a president, as they did with Jimmy Carter, as many conspiracy folks might say they did with Kennedy. It raises a lot of questions. Who is really in charge? I mean, with the essence of the state, the state, when you get down to it, what is the state? It is bodies of armed men at the end of the day. I mean, the state is the military, the state is the FBI, the state is the police apparatus, and so the elected government, yes, is supposed to be in charge of the state, but it seems in some cases the state can have an agenda of its own.
Caleb, we're out of time. Thank you for joining us. Great conversation this morning. Really appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Caleb Maupin, for those listening, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris, puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. I say new. We need to change that because we've been saying that for a little while now. Anyway, you can follow Caleb on Twitter, and you should, at Caleb Maupin. Also read his articles at calebmaupin.com. You're listening to Fault Lines. When we come back, we're taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. We'll be back on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Wait, Andre, what's the disclaimer there? What you talking about? What are you? Okay. I have no idea what you're talking about. So there's chatter in the chat room here. 202-521-1320. We have calling in now Tarif from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Free Julian Assange, free Danziger, hands off Haiti. Haiti have a potential to be a major port because they have a port. If it's built by China, it's 70 feet deep, which means it can take large cargo ships, and it can also, break down those big old Conexes and also ship them to the Miami port. That's only 50 feet deep. And the only thing they have to do is just recognize China as a one-state country, and they got to start recognizing Taiwan. If they do that, then they'll get anywhere from $7 billion to $30 billion in loans for infrastructure program for Haiti. But you have all type of, but they have, they locked in certain loans where they can't really get outside loans because of treaties and type of agreements they sign. This guy had confronted Mike Pompeo yesterday, and he asked about the assassination attempts on Julian Assange and whatnot, and Mike Pompeo was kind of like nervous and stumbling over his words, and he didn't really. He basically told the guy to not believe Yahoo News, basically. And I'm gonna share this the video link with y'all underneath y'all tweet for the day. And another video I saw of a woman from this country, El Salvador.
Not sure what happened on that.
Not sure what happened on that one. Tarif, still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. It sounded like a phone started coming in there or something like that. You were talking about El Salvador.
Yeah, El Salvador. A woman shared a video of a woman showing that a kit that people get if they have COVID-19. And on the kit, they got vitamin C, vitamin D. You got your Tylenol, aspirin. And you got your zinc. And the last thing you have, what the lady said, that they're giving the people with COVID-19 is ivermectin. So that's what they're giving the people in El Salvador. So that's proof right there. So
that's not
proof of anything.
No, that's not proof. Go for it, though, Tarif. That's not proof that ivermectin works. Just because some people are using it doesn't mean that it works.
That's like saying people are taking horse dewormer, and so that's evidence that horse dewormer works.
It's a different level because he's talking about a country, but still.
But I'm gonna ask you something, Jamal. I'm gonna ask you something. They have penicillin you can give to horses. That's what horses. You got penicillin you give to humans. Matter of fact, since you brought that up, Jimmy Dore went over that for the past week about you have two doctors, one of Nova's prize a couple of years ago for developing ivermectin for human use.
I mean, Tarif, people, I can give my dog Phenergan for nausea. I can give my dog Benadryl to help with allergies. That doesn't necessarily mean that giving a person Benadryl or giving a person Benadryl or Phenergan is going to do anything for COVID. I mean, you're acting as if any random medication can be used for any random illness, and it doesn't work that way.
I totally disagree with you, Jamal.
You can disagree, but what I just said was flat fact true. You can give anybody medication for anything. Just because you can give it to an animal or whatever, or you can give it to a person, doesn't necessarily mean that it works for every particular condition.
Jamal, they got human use of ivermectin. It's going to get to a point where things are going to change. And when they have investigations and things like that, and they have these doctors from around the world that come here and start testifying and stuff like that, and also patients that took different type of drugs that they say in the United States and some parts of Europe that is only for horses or ducks or whatever.
Nobody said it was only for horses or ducks.
You know, but the thing is this, Jamal, yes, ivermectin is used for human beings too.
But nobody said it wasn't.
Well, but no, there was a time there when it was like, it's just horse dewormer.
No. People realized that people were taking ivermectin in South America and everything else. The question was whether or not it actually worked. People in the United States, because doctors wouldn't prescribe it, started taking horse dewormer in order to get their fix of it.
That was ivermectin. It was just in another dose.
Yeah, it was just in a different for horses. Yeah,
but that's the point, is that it's the same drug. Anyway, Tarif, thank you for the call. We got to go to Brave calling in from ATL. Brave calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on the line. What's on your mind, man?
Hey, I was just calling about you guys' segment on YouTube, cutting off RT, the slippery slope conversation. But the ivermectin thing is calling me, but I'm not going to get involved, right? So we keep you, like, even when I cover it on my channel, I talk about it, I say the slippery slope, right? But I'm starting to wonder, I'm going to have to go on in my thesaurus or my dictionary and find out what the little snippy term is for that comes after the slippery slope.
You mean complete collapse or just falling down the cliff? Honestly, man, it's very wild. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, this wasn't a situation of a channel pushing disinformation. This wasn't even a situation of the channel lying or anything like that. This was basically a conversation. And the conversation in and of itself seemed to be too far. And it doesn't even seem like it was a conversation by random people. People who were, at the forefront of the various fields. Again, too much. And so, this is shadow banning wasn't enough. The gutting the ability for people to see the channel, that wasn't enough. And it's like, despite all of that, the channel was still, like number 5 or something like that. That was insufficient. And they've gone so far as to take down not just one channel, but both. It's astonishing.
It's extremely scary. I would urge people to, this is the hard part, but I think this is the most important part. I would urge people to not compartmentalize and to not add little dividers in between the subject matter, right? In between COVID conversations or in between the Biden, Hunter Biden conversation and the Julian Assange thing and the Tulsi Gabbard thing, because these are all examples, and they're far more than just these, but these are all examples of the tech companies, the social media companies, taking control of our speech. Taking control. Forget the speech, because that goes to the whole argument of whether it's First Amendment rights for speech. Freedom of speech. It's not. It's more than that. It's beyond that. I mean, screw that conversation. This is about control over a populace, right? Because if we can't have conversations, if the media and the social media can determine that we can't talk about certain articles, certain stories that might affect the politician that they want and play, then we don't have, I don't believe that we have fair elections in the first place, but we definitely don't have any chance of any kind of fair election, which means we don't have any kind of chance of democracy. You have people, you guys in your headlines, you talked about the mandates and all of these people being laid off. Now, the argument for whether or not you support the mandates or not support the mandates, just fine, right? Either side, whatever, right? The larger point is, when in society have we been at a point where, in American society at minimum, where we've been at a point where you can't say something, and now we have control over your person. And just think about, if anyone can step away from the politics for a second, just take a step back, right, and think about like the Orwellian consequences that are involved in these things. I cannot have a conversation about the president's speech about the mandates. My video was taken down ASAP. Like, it was taken down. I put it up. It wasn't crazy. I read from the White House website. They took it down as ASAP and said that it was against the safety rules or keeping people safe or something like that, right? We are fast approaching. I think we're past the dangerous place. We are in a dangerous place. But we are fast approaching a point from which we will not be able to return. And I just hope people, no matter where you fall at on the vaccine or no vaccine or the Democrat or Republican or the progressive or whatever, I hope people are paying attention, because this is how you get to that point. I'm gonna shut up after this, but this is how you get to that point where you're looking back and you're like, man, how did we get here?
Brave, we're gonna have to end it here. Thank you for the commentary. All right, guys, we're gonna end it for today. My Shane, co-host, I want to thank him for his help. I want to thank the engineers, our producers, and of course, I want to thank all of you. We will see you tomorrow. Fault Lines, Thomas, Stranahan, back in the morning. Thanks all.